Chapter 577. For the next 2 to 3 days, they entered a busy work phase. Jinwan's period of discomfort had finally passed. She could now go to work and socialize with all her might. She attended all sorts of meetings, exhibitions, and other matters. On this trip to Jing City, the only major mistake she made was to believe Mo Jingshan's words. He said that there was no need to bring an assistant or secretary. As a result, she had to do everything personally. Of course, Mo Jingshan did not call Shenmu over. Instead, he brought Xiaohu over. Clearly, most of the time, Xiaohu was treated as their chauffeur or housekeeper. All sorts of miscellaneous tasks were handled by Xiaohu. As for the other matters, Mo Jingshan rarely did them personally. For the past 2 days, she had been so busy that she did not have any free time. Every day, she would only return to the hotel after 10 o'clock at night. She would drag her tired body and take a shower before falling into a deep sleep. In the past few years, the property market in the country had been on the rise. This time, there was a construction exhibition in Jing City that was jointly organized by the nation's property companies. All the major property companies in the country had been invited to participate. Although MN Group was diversified, it was still founded on property. Thus, it was also one of the invited names. Mo Jingshan was also invited, but at the same time, he had a more important meeting to attend. Thus, Mo Jingshan left Xiaohu by Jinwan's side and had Xiaohu accompany her to attend the construction exhibition. After arriving at the exhibition hall, Xiaohu eagerly helped Jinwan with various matters. He went in first to make arrangements and then came out. CEO Ji, I found a seat for you. You can sit down for the entire exhibition. You can also sit with the people in charge of BGY Group. I heard that BGY Group has been in contact with your company for the past few years. This way, it'll be more convenient for you to talk while looking at the architectural models. Are BGY's people here as well? That's right. For an exhibition like this to be held in Jing City, a large property company like BGY will definitely have a spot. Jinwan nodded and walked in. Today's exhibition was mostly about the physical models of various landmarks in the country, as well as some buildings that sold particularly well and had referential prices. In the exhibition hall, there was a huge map with the names of each city and model marked. Among them, there were 4 models in High City. Shine Group currently did not specialize in the real estate industry. Although Mo Jingshan was also invited, Shine Group's buildings were not among the models. Instead, there were 2 from BGY Group and 2 from High City's newest real estate companies. MN Group's buildings were also not among them. This thing was actually a representation, nothing more than an exhibition and introduction. After Jinwan went in, she greeted several familiar people from High City. Xiaohu pointed her to the seats that had been arranged. She nodded and walked over there. When she first arrived, she did not pay much attention to the people nearby. All of a sudden, she heard a familiar male voice. Jinwan. She couldn't help but stop in her tracks. She turned around abruptly and saw Mr. Vince, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, walking to the seat next to her with Secretary Yang, who was always with him. Jinwan looked at Mr. Vince, and then at his seat, which was next to hers. Jinwan. This was the seat arranged by Xiaohu? He was innocent, wasn't he? If Mo Jingshan were to find out, she wasn't sure if Xiaohu would still be able to keep his job. Why are you in Jing City? Before Jinwan could speak, Mr. Vince had seen the nameplate of the seat next to his, and turned to look at her, asking at the same time. I'm here on a business trip. I've been in Jing City for several days. Haven't you been back to High City recently? Jinwan sat down first. Seeing that she had sat down, Mr. Vince gave a faint smile, motioned for Secretary Yang to go to his seat, and then sat in the seat closest to Jinwan. I haven't been back to High City for some time. I received an exhibition notice in Jing City, so I flew over early this morning. Mr. Vince said as he opened the bottle of mineral water on the table for her and handed it to her. I haven't seen you for some time. How have you been? If someone else had asked this question, it would have been a polite greeting, but coming from Mr. Vince's mouth, Jinwan knew that he really wanted to ask how she was doing recently. She took the water and smiled. I'm fine. I've been busy these days, so I fell asleep as soon as I went back to the hotel. I slept well at night and was in good spirits during the day. The new projects and collaborations I've been talking about have all gone well. Hearing her words, Mr. Vince smiled. Why do you look so pale? Jean noticed that Mr. Vince's face was thinner and paler than before. A few days ago, I had a gathering with some old classmates who came back from abroad. I haven't had a gathering for many years. It's rare for us to get together, so I drank too much and hurt my stomach. It's all right. I'll be fine after resting for a while. Mr. Vince smiled mildly, because of her relationship with him. After all, I'm no longer a young man in my teens or 20s. I'm in my 30s. I should control my drinking. Otherwise, it's easy for me to drink too much and hurt my body. Hearing that he hurt his stomach because of drinking, Jean couldn't help but be slightly surprised. I always thought you could hold your liquor well. Yes, I could. Mr. Vince smiled. But no matter how good your drinking capacity is, you can't try mixing red, white, and beer all night without stopping? Jean nodded. I don't dare to try that. You know, no matter how good my drinking capacity was when I was in London, I can't even hold 2 bottles of wine. If I mix white and red, I'll probably collapse after a few glasses. Mr. Vince chuckled. You better forget it. There's no need for a girl to drink so much. Usually, you secretly pour away a lot at the table. Don't think I didn't see it. There were several times when Jean met Mr. Vince at the table, but she didn't expect him to see all of her little actions. She couldn't help but chuckle. Looks like I need to practice my technique of secretly pouring wine. You saw it, so did everyone else. If everyone knows it, and I still pretend to drink to my heart's content, how awkward would that be? As she spoke, Xiaohu approached from behind. The seat Xiaohu had arranged for him was right behind Jean. He noticed that Jean and this BGY representative were chatting happily and seemed to be very familiar with each other. When they were chatting, their bodies were leaning closer to each other, as though they were whispering with their heads lowered. Chapter 578. Usually, CEO G would never take the initiative to lean so close to COMO, nor did she smile so warmly. However, she appeared to be chatting passionately with this BGY's general manager. He did not hear what CEO G said, but all Xiaohu saw from behind was the two of them smiling at each other. CEO G Xiaohu suddenly stood up, tilting his head forward to say, COMO said that after the exhibition ends, I'll send you to his place. Tonight, you can return to the hotel together. Jean paused at Xiaohu's abrupt words. She turned to glance at Xiaohu, but Xiaohu immediately retracted his head and returned to his original seat with a vexed expression. Was it wrong to arrange for COG to be with BGY's people? Mr. Vince heard the words of the person behind Jean and maintained a faint smile on his face. He did not speak and lowered his head to open another bottle of mineral water. Mo Jingshan was also in Jing City, returning to the hotel together? After opening the bottle, Mr. Vince placed the bottle on the table and did not speak further. However, his forehead suddenly felt a cool and soft touch. He paused, watching Jean who had suddenly placed her hand on his forehead. Jean hand was not cold, but when it was placed on his forehead, it felt slightly cold. I already said that your complexion doesn't look too good. Not only is your stomach not feeling well, you're also running a fever, aren't you? Are you working despite your illness? The woman's hand was soft as though it had no bones. She placed it on his forehead for a while before placing it down. Mr. Vince sat in his original position, without moving or speaking. There seemed to be a lingering sensation on his forehead. Jean first touched her own bag. I don't have the habit of carrying cold medicine or fever medicine with me. Did your secretary bring it? Doesn't the secretary know that you're running a fever? It's quite hot to the touch. Mr. Vince's gaze paused on her face. His eyes, which had become much lighter due to Mo Jingshan's presence, continuously darkened and deepened bit by bit. Jean didn't notice his strangeness and was still concerned about his physical condition. You can't work when you're sick. A few days ago, when I wasn't feeling well, I tried to rest in the hotel. I occasionally came out for a walk, but I often sat down. When the exhibition is over, go back to rest. Don't neglect your health. When I arrived in Beijing this morning, I felt uncomfortable and sleepy as soon as I got off the plane. If you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have realized that I had a fever. Mr. Vince smiled. It's okay. I'll go back early after I'm done here. Don't worry. Jinwan nodded. Seeing that a grown man like him would not be affected by a fever, she did not speak further. She signaled with her eyes for him to pick up the bottle of mineral water he had just opened on the table to drink. Her meaning was for him to drink more water. Drinking more water during a fever would help him sweat. When the exhibition began, Jinwan watched and listened for a while. She felt that it was pointless and inadvertently noticed that Mr. Vince had been watching intently the entire time. He did not have any relationship with any of BGY's senior management. He had relied solely on his education and years of work experience to secure his position as the general manager. It was clear how dedicated he was. She picked up her phone and glanced at it. She recalled that she had previously added Qin's sighting on WeChat. However, after the previous incident, it was inappropriate for her to directly ask Qin's sighting about it. Thus, she decided to post a message in her circle of friends. Will stomach discomfort cause a fever? Is the situation serious? After sending the message, she placed her phone down. Several minutes later, she remembered and picked up her phone to take a look. There were several comments. Several employees and Xiaoba in the company were asking if her stomach was uncomfortable and if it was serious. Xia Tian sent a bunch of question marks. What's wrong with you? Qin Sighting's comment was at the bottom. Gastroenteritis can indeed cause a fever. Usually it refers to acute gastroenteritis. There will be symptoms of fever and vomiting. It needs to be treated with antibiotics and related drugs. It's not a serious illness, but if it causes a fever, it means that the inflammation is serious. It's best to be hospitalized for treatment. Jinwan replied to him. Smiley face. Worship, as expected of a doctor. The way you speak is like Baidu Wikipedia. However, just as Jinwan lowered her head to look at the comments, Xiao Hu, who was seated at the back, was already bombarded by his boss's phone call. Hello CEO Mo. Xiao Hu trembled as he answered the call. He did not know why CEO Mo would suddenly call him when he was busy. Jinwan's stomach is uncomfortable? And she has a fever? Mo Jingshan asked. Ah, no. Xiao Hu was dumbfounded. He raised his eyes to look at Jinwan, who was currently scrolling through her phone with her head lowered. She pursed her lips and appeared to be fine. COG seems to be in good condition. She doesn't seem sick at all. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment on the other end of the line. He suddenly asked in a heavy voice, who's by her side right now? There aren't many people. They're all big bosses from various companies who were invited to the exhibition hall today. Xiao Hu's words were somewhat vague. He was unsure if this BGY's general manager was familiar with CEOG. He was unsure if he had arranged this seat wrongly. After hesitating for a long time, he finally said, the person in front of her is the manager of the exhibition hall. Behind her is me. To her left is the manager of a real estate company called Lucheng, which has a partnership with MN Group. To her right is the manager of BGY Group, which has a partnership with MN Group. Mo Jingshan had just left the meeting hall. When he heard the words BGY, his footsteps paused. He raised his head to look at the parking lot in the distance, narrowing his eyes as he coldly spoke. BGY's manager? Their local general manager, Vince? That's right. COMO, didn't you not come? How did you know? Xiao Hu felt a chill run down his spine from Mo Jingshan's tone. But it seems like Mr. Vince is the one who isn't feeling well. It seems like his mental state isn't very good. Mo Jingshan's expression did not reveal anything. He only calmly said, I'll be there in a moment. All right, CEO Mo. After hanging up, Mo Jingshan opened up Jinwan's circle of friends. He saw that the night before yesterday, Qin Sighting had added Jinwan after discovering their WeChat contacts. He then saw Jinwan's reply. Very good. The first post was related to a man, but it was posted for another man. Below it was her interaction with another man. Mo Jingshan read Jinwan's post over and over again. He then read her conversation with Qin Sighting over and over again. His brows furrowed, and his expression became increasingly expressionless. Chapter 579. Seeing Qin sightings comment. Jinwan knew that he was not busy right now and had time to talk. So she sent a message to Qin sighting and asked him about the gastroenteritis and fever. Then she said a few polite words. She put down the phone. Less than half an hour later, Mo Jingshan called. She had not saved Mo Jingshan's number in her contacts. She had not saved it since she returned to China. Jinwan looked at the number on her phone that she had memorized without saving it in her contacts and picked it up. The man's voice came through. Is the exhibition over? Not yet. It'll probably be another hour. Jinwan heard his tone again and glanced at the quiet crowd around her. She lowered her voice to say, "It's not convenient for me to answer the phone here. Did you call just to tell me in?" The man said indifferently, "Look ahead to the right." Jinwan paused and raised her eyes to look in the direction he pointed. She first saw the exhibition stand and then turned to the right. All of a sudden, she saw a man dressed in a black suit standing in the unobtrusive resting area by the side of the exhibition stand. Jinwan, when did this man come over? Didn't he say that he had a meeting today? So he asked Xiaohu to accompany her here and look for him later? Why did he come to the exhibition hall? Since Mo Jingshan was standing there, it was clear that the people here recognized him and did not dare to stop him. However, there were no seats here, so they opened the door by the side of the stand and let him sit there so that he could look at the exhibition stand from a close distance. However, it was clear that the man had no intention of looking at the exhibition stand. Instead, he indifferently looked in her direction through the small crowd. Most importantly, the man's expression was not very good, especially when he saw Mr. Vince, who was sitting next to her slightly, because he was not feeling well, and his head was almost leaning toward her. Mo Jingshan's expression became even colder and more indifferent. Sensing that Jinwan was sitting next to him, Mr. Vince, who was originally fine, suddenly seemed to have a slight change in his mood. Mr. Vince was the closest to her. As Mo Jingshan was standing behind the lights, he could not see him clearly without looking carefully. He only glanced at the exhibition stand and then turned to look at her. "What are you looking at?" Jinwan's expression was calm. "Nothing." She felt that he seemed a little weak just now, so she turned her eyes and said, "I just asked a friend who is a doctor. He said that it's best to go to the hospital for a fever caused by gastroenteritis. If it's serious, you'll have to be treated in the hospital for 2 days. You can't force yourself like this." Mr. Vince smiled faintly. "Well, if it's not done in 2 days, I'll go and take a look. You're already running a fever, and you still want to wait until you're done. You'd better go there after we leave the exhibition hall." Mo Jingshan stood in the distance. Seeing Jinwan whispering to the man next to her and speaking very seriously, his face gradually darkened. From the moment he came in, he saw the two of them sitting together. The little woman who usually frowned at him often smiled at the man, who often went to London for the past 3 years to make his presence known in front of her. She had even posted a post on her WeChat moments just for this man. The exhibition had reached an important period. The person on stage had also reached an important part. Jinwan's gaze returned to the exhibition stand. She did not look at anyone. After she finished looking through this part of the exhibition, the models and pictures on the display stand and the large screen in front of her had all been changed. She lowered her eyes to look at her phone. After looking at her hand for a while, she seemed to remember that Mo Jingshan had come earlier. She raised her eyes again, only to see that the man who had been standing in the dark by the side of the exhibition stand had disappeared. Jinwan's gaze faltered. Did he leave because he had something to do? She retracted her gaze and continued to look at the exhibition stand. After several minutes, the person in charge of Lu Chung Group, who was sitting on her left, stood up to go to the restroom. Several minutes later, someone returned and sat by her side. Jinwan did not pay much attention to it at first because the lighting in the exhibition hall was dim. However, she suddenly felt a sense of familiarity by her side. It also carried a clear and heavy aura, causing her to abruptly turn her head. She first lowered her eyes to see a pair of long legs dressed in black trousers. Her gaze then moved up bit by bit. She saw a black shirt and a suit jacket casually placed by the side. She continued moving up to see a shirt with 2 or 3 buttons undone, a man's seductive collarbone, Adam's apple, and a well-defined and incomparably handsome chin. When she met Mo Jingshan's gaze, Jinwan instantly pursed her lips. She could not help but look in the direction beside him, and then in another direction. Her expression was strange. Isn't this the seat of the person in charge of Lu Qing Group? You sit here. When he comes back, where should he sit? Seeing her slow reaction, and the fact that she could not find the main topic on him, Mo Jingshan was expressionless. You're really concerned about a lot of people. I've asked someone to arrange a VIP seat for him in the front row. Jinwan made a no sound and retracted her gaze. She continued to look at the exhibition stand, and did not pay him any attention. The surroundings were very quiet. Everyone was basically whispering a few words, before continuing to listen patiently to the explanation on the exhibition stand. Mo Jingshan did not speak further, and only sat by Jinwan's side. All of a sudden, Jinwan's right hand was covered by a hand. She turned to look at Mr. Vince, who was seated to her right. Mr. Vince leaned over and whispered into her ear. Look at the model on display right now. It's the overall concept model of several European-style villas that BGY plans to introduce nationwide this year. Our company plans to promote this type of residential area in various cities. What do you think of the design of these villas? Mr. Vince was not trying to take advantage of her. He had only placed his hand on Jinwan's hand to attract her attention. She tried to draw her attention back, but when he saw that Jinwan's hand did not move away, nor did she make any movements to push him away, Mr. Vince did not move his hand away, and continued to place it on hers, as though it was natural. Jinwan's gaze shifted to the new set of architectural models and detailed drawings on the screen that Mr. Vince had mentioned. She found them somewhat familiar. Weren't these the architectural models of BGY's luxurious villas that many wealthy people in the country had been particularly fond of in recent years? She did not expect that BGY would only begin to promote and design these now. She felt as though she had stepped onto a point in history. Jinwan smiled. Before she could speak, she abruptly felt the air pressure on her left drop to the point where many people around her felt as though they were about to freeze. Chapter 580. When Mo Jingshan spoke, the anger on his face was unprecedentedly clear, and anyone could see that he was angry. Hearing this, Jinwan immediately wanted to take her hand back, but she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her wrist. She turned to look at the man who had pulled her wrist out first, and met his black eyes. His eyes, which were usually deep and indifferent, were now a deep sea of fire. He stared at her as if to burn her, and every line of his face was tense. It was clear that he was angry and enduring. Jinwan had never seen Mo Jingshan so directly angry, nor did she see him angry. It was almost the first time that he was so angry. Her heart shrank slightly and she frowned. It hurts. Mo Jingshan looked at her wrinkled face, and realized how hard he had held her wrist just now. He let go of her wrist, but his face was expressionless and cold as if ice was about to form. Mr. Vince was not feeling well today, so his attention was not as sharp as usual. When Jinwan vaguely said the word, "It hurts," he turned to look at the man on the other side of her. The two men looked at each other. One was slightly startled, and the other was cold and indifferent. There was an indescribable undercurrent in their eyes at the same time. Jinwan was talking to Mr. Vince. Because he was not feeling well today, she leaned closer to him to avoid his voice being lower than usual. Besides, he was just talking to her about the building models, so she was only slightly sensitive to the hand that suddenly covered hers. However, because she felt that Mr. Vince was having a fever and his palm was obviously hot, she hesitated and did not move her hand away. It had only been less than a minute since their hands touched. She didn't expect that Mo Jingshan, who was usually expressionless, would be clearly angry. CEO Mo? Mr. Vince spoke first. When he saw that Mo Jingshan had sat down next to Jinwan, he understood what was going on. However, Jinwan's concern for him just now made him want to give up again. He suddenly made up his mind to cut off all means of retreat. Even if the person he had to fight against was Mo Jingshan, He didn't intend to give up so easily. So Mr. Vince's voice sounded polite, but it was full of emotions that only Mo Jingxian could understand. Now he knew that the relationship between Jinwan and Mo Jingxian had not recovered to that extent. He wouldn't say anything about what happened in Yuehubei, but since Jinwan hadn't remarried him or made up with him, it meant that he still had a chance. Mo Jingxian didn't speak, not even a word of response, but just glanced at him indifferently. The two men sitting next to her were both about 1.8 meters tall. Their figures were almost perfect, and they were both dressed in expensive and exquisite formal suits. Furthermore, they were both black. Although Mr. Vince's background was slightly simpler, and his status as BGY's general manager was not as shocking as his status as Shine Group's global CEO, he was actually an elite in every aspect. In front of Mo Jingxian, he did not show the slightest bit of timidity. The two men both exuded a cold and aloof aura. More importantly, the two men sat on her left and right, sandwiching her between them. Strangely, Jinwan felt that her current situation was almost comparable to the Shiraba. In the past few years, the way she interacted with Mr. Vince was not very deliberate. Instead, it was very natural. When she first returned to the country, the person she interacted with the most was Mr. Vince. However, in Mo Jingxian's eyes, this kind of relationship was not the same. Mo Jingxian was the first to indifferently withdraw his gaze. When the guide on the stage announced that the exhibition would end here, he took Jinwan's hand and stood up to leave. The moment Jinwan's figure was forced to stand up with him, Mr. Vince said with a faint smile, "Shine Group's headquarters is still in Los Angeles. In the past few years, CEO Mo hasn't returned to the country much. This time, you seem to have stayed in the country for too long. Is this also moving the company's headquarters back to the country?" Mo Jingxian paused and said indifferently, "Monwan Group's headquarters has been moved back to the country. Why can't Shine Group be moved back?" Jinwan, Monwan Group? She had clearly changed its name to MN Group, but he actually insisted on calling it Monwan. Mr. Vince glanced sideways at Jinwan. Seeing that Jinwan pursed her lips and obviously had no intention of cooperating with Mo Jingxian, he gave a playful smile. "Monwan? Why do I remember that when she registered the company name in London, her mentor said that she could use her original name, but she insisted on changing it to MN. Originally, she wanted to use other letters, but in order to make it easier to remember, she used the two letters MN. This has nothing to do with Monwan. Jinwan." Mr. Vince was not in High City before. She had thought that he didn't approach her because of Mo Jingxian, but now it seemed that it was not the case. His tone clearly sounded to be against Mo Jingxian, and he had no intention of being suppressed by Mo Jingxian's momentum at all. Jinwan could clearly smell the smoke of gunpowder. Mo Jingxian held Jinwan's hand, put his arm around her waist, and quietly tightened his grip on her waist. He sneered and said calmly, "Do you think Monwan doesn't exist just because MN has replaced Monwan?" A few months ago, the British media and the domestic media had interviewed her and asked her about the purpose of MN. She had said that she just wanted to continue the name of her original studio, but had changed it to letters in order to conform to international standards. Was the interview she had given herself more reliable? Or was your words worth my time and consideration? Or perhaps, you can only find some comfort in these words? Mr. Vince's face changed slightly and darkened. Mo Jingxian put his arm around her and went out. This time, Mr. Vince did not speak again. Jinwan wanted to say something for Mr. Vince, but thinking that he was not evenly matched with Mo Jingxian, she knew that whatever she said now would not do him any good. But before walking out of Mr. Vince's sight, she quietly looked back at him and raised her hand to point to her stomach, reminding him to remember to go to the hospital. Seeing that Jinwan was still winking at Vince, Mo Jingxian took her out of the exhibition hall and let her go. He didn't say a word and didn't even look at her, let alone lower his head to talk to her intimately. Chapter 581. She glanced at him. "We only sat together and chatted. What's wrong with touching hands? Is there a need to be so impolite to me?" The man ignored her and went to the security guard in the parking lot to receive the electronic car key. He asked coldly, Where did you park it? The security guard said respectfully. Sir, your car was parked in parking lot number 208 on the B2 floor. Mo Jingshan went down the stairs of the parking lot. Jinwan turned to look at Xiaohu who had followed her out. Although Xiaohu did not understand the situation, he felt that he could not protect himself, and did not speak much. When his eyes met Jinwan's, he quickly turned his head away. He followed Mo Jingshan's back and called out eagerly, "COMO." When they reached the car, Mo Jingshan sat in the back. Even after Jinwan got into the car, he did not acknowledge her, or look her in the eye. He lowered his head to pick up the documents on the back seat, and read through them. His expression was still cold and unpleasant. He did not speak, nor did Jinwan. The man's slender fingers flipped through the documents in his hands, treating her as though she did not exist. Xiaohu glanced at the time as he drove, and then boldly spoke up in the overly quiet atmosphere in the car. "COMO, the exhibition ended early this morning. Do you want to continue with your afternoon schedule? Or do you want to return to the hotel? It's already past 12. You and COG haven't had lunch yet. Do you want to find a place to eat first?" "All right." Jinwan readily agreed. Coincidentally, she was hungry. The man did not move his eyes. He indifferently watched her expression, as though she was in high spirits the moment she heard that they were going to eat. He coldly said, "Whatever." Seeing that he was willing to speak, Jinwan finally turned to look at him. "Are we going to eat Chinese food or Western food?" Mo Jingshan silently watched her calm expression as though nothing had happened. His gaze was cold, and he did not say a word. Jinwan very consciously turned her eyes away from him, and made a decision. "I've been eating Chinese food for the past few days. I haven't seen any particularly good Chinese food in Jing City. Let's eat Western food today." Seeing that CEO Mo did not speak, Xiaohu continued to drive in search of a good Western restaurant nearby. When they arrived at the restaurant, Jinwan handed the menu to them to order. Mo Jingshan tossed the menu to Xiaohu, asking him to order. Xiaohu continued to tremble. "Well, CEO Mo, although I understand your taste, I really don't know CEOG's taste very well. Why don't you two order some?" Jinwan had no intention of taking the menu. Anyway, she would just eat casually. She gave Xiaohu a look, indicating for him to pass the menu to Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan had no intention of accepting it. The man casually said, "Order whatever you want to eat." "I don't even understand how you look at men now, so how would I know what you like to eat?" "Jinwan, what does that mean?" Was he implying that her attitude towards Mr. Vince was slightly better now, and mocking her for her poor taste in men? "Xiaohu, was CEO Mo jealous? Today's seat was arranged. It's relatively close, and Mr. Vince has taken good care of me these past few years. There's nothing wrong with talking to him. Furthermore, Mr. Vince has pursued me for more than 3 years. We're both adults, and there's nothing between us. At most, we'll touch hands and talk. Is there a need for me to be so unreasonable?" Mo Jingshan silently watched her, his gaze cold. Xiaohu had already slowly stood up. He felt that this topic was not suitable for him to listen to and softly said, "I'm going to the bathroom." After speaking, he disappeared as though his feet had been smeared with oil. The waiter by the side was slightly awkward. He politely asked, "Miss, what would you like to order?" In such situations, men would usually give in to women, so he was used to asking the woman directly. Jinwan glanced at the menu. She did not wish to continue occupying the waiter's time, and casually ordered a few dishes. The waiter politely took the menu back and turned to leave. Jinwan lowered her head to look at her phone. If he didn't speak, she wouldn't take the initiative to speak. Anyway, she had never seen Mo Jingshan angry before. Even when she was still attached to him in the past, she didn't know how to coax him when he was so seriously angry. Let alone now, she didn't plan to coax him at all. If he wanted to be angry, she didn't care. Although she had always maintained the attitude of a friend toward Mr. Vince, and had never agreed or flirted with him in the past 3 years, she had always scrupulously abided by her own principles. But in the past 3 years, Mr. Vince had helped her a lot and taken care of her many times. It was all true. In the past 3 years, whenever she encountered difficulties, Mo Jingshan did not appear. He basically left her alone. Even if he was following the trajectory of her life, There were some things he had to let go, and let her go on her own. But in the past 3 years, no matter how strong she was, she still received support and help from her friends. When he was not by her side, she was grateful to everyone who helped her. So it was impossible for her to maintain a cold attitude toward Mr. Vince. There was nothing wrong with being concerned about Mr. Vince's health. If Xia Tian wasn't feeling well, she would have been more concerned, and even taken Xia Tian to the hospital. Between friends, why couldn't they be concerned? When Xiao Hu came out of the restroom, he saw that the atmosphere at the table seemed to be in a cold war. He hesitated for a long time before returning. Chapter 582. Jinwan didn't go to the bathroom. She just wanted to stay away from the Cold War. She washed her hands and touched up her makeup. After about 10 minutes, she turned around and was about to go out. But when she walked out of the door, she suddenly saw the man leaning against the wall and smoking outside. As soon as she went out, she was surrounded by a cloud of smoke. She paused for a moment and watched the man smoking. Unlike other men, Mo Jingshan looked calmer and steadier when he smoked. Even though there was smoke around him, it didn't smell unacceptable. Instead, it smelled faintly of mint. But why did he come here to smoke? The men's bathroom was downstairs, and this was the women's bathroom. She hadn't moved since she came out. She just stood on the spot and looked at him. The man also glanced at her when she walked out. The sparks between his fingers flickered. He didn't stop because she saw him, but he didn't do anything deliberately. The two of them just stood there silently and smoked silently. When Mo Jingshan put out the cigarette butt and threw it aside, Jinwan asked, "You don't seem to smoke much before." "Yes," the man said flatly. "Have you smoked often in the past 3 years?" Occasionally. Jinwan didn't speak anymore. After all, when she was downstairs, the man's face was cold. Now she just came out to the bathroom, but he followed her. On the one hand, she felt she did nothing wrong, but on the other hand, she didn't know what to say or do. The man glanced at the bathroom behind her. "Is there anyone else in there?" No. Jinwan was indeed alone in there just now. The man looked at her again, suddenly stood up from leaning against the wall, and then, before Jinwan could react, he took a step towards her. His approach was so oppressive that she instinctively took a few steps back into the bathroom. When the man also came in, her eyes froze. "This is the women's bathroom." Before she finished speaking, the door of the bathroom was closed by the man. "Jinwan." The man was still approaching. She looked at him strangely and stepped back step by step until she leaned against the sink. "Mo Jingshan, are you trying to be a hooligan in the ladies' room?" Jinwan placed her hands behind her back, between her waist and the marble sink. Seeing that the man did not speak and only looked at her, it was as if he wanted to see through her and see what she was thinking through his almost compelling gaze. Jinwan turned her head away slightly, saying unhappily, "Weren't you still angry with me earlier? Are you still going to have a cold war with me? What is this now?" "Well, I'm not angry now." The man's tone was light, but he still didn't retreat. Jinwan immediately glanced at him. "Why aren't you angry?" "You were inexplicably angry, and then inexplicably dispelled. Some emotions come without reason, and it's true that I can't control them," the man said. "But if I continue to be angry, it doesn't seem to be good for me." Jinwan's expression was cold. "As expected, you're astonishingly calm in the face of everything. Even at a time like this, you can still consider the pros and cons. What can I do if I don't consider it? With your current temper, you don't even know how to coax people. I might not be able to pull you back. If I push you away again, I'm afraid you'll only jump further." The man's tone sounded light and indifferent, but he seemed a little aggrieved. Why was he aggrieved? Because she didn't coax him? How childish was this Mo Jingshan? But then again, her current words and actions were indeed very much according to her own temperament, and she was the kind that had no scruples at all. Jinwan didn't speak, but raised her hand to push his chest, then put her hand on his body and said coldly, "Speaking of the story in the bathroom, I still remember that time in the bar before the divorce. Because I was flirting with those men on the dance floor, you directly dragged me into the men's bathroom. I was so angry that I pressed you against the wall and grabbed your shirt collar. Do you remember what you said to me at that time? The man's brows moved. He didn't say anything, but he clearly remembered the shameless things he had said and done back then. You said, "You think you can hold me down?" Jinwan's voice was light, and then she raised her eyebrows and slightly hooked her fingers to the collar of his shirt. She then gave a cold smile. "Mo Jingshan, do you think you can hold me down now?" With that, she was about to push the man away deadpan. However, the man didn't push her away. Instead, he easily raised his hand to hold her wrist, put his other arm around her waist, and buckled her into his arms. When Jinwan was surprised, he bent his head and chuckled. "Of course I can. Jinwan." This was not the script. Then, the man pressed her against the marble sink and held the back of her head with the hand that was around her waist. He leaned down and kissed her fiercely. This kiss seemed to be mixed with the anger that hadn't dissipated, showing that he was not as calm as he seemed. This kiss was impatient and aggressive. Jinwan leaned against the sink and suddenly wanted to resist. She raised her leg and was about to kick the man's leg, but the man pressed her leg under the sink with his strong, straight long leg, and she couldn't move at all. "Yu, Mo Jingshan Yu, Shen." Jinwan wriggled in his arms angrily. Mo Jingshan held her waist and deepened the kiss. From the initial aggression, it gradually softened and became a lingering kiss. While she was catching her breath, he pressed his lips against hers and said hoarsely, "A kiss can at least ease my anger. You don't want me to keep this anger until tonight, do you?" Tonight? She had been too busy these days. It was rare that Mo Jingshan didn't enter her room after she returned to the hotel and told her to have a good rest. Did he have any plans now? Jinwan rolled her eyes and bit the man's lips harshly. The man felt pain on his lips, but he didn't let go of her. It wasn't until both of them tasted blood that he withdrew from her mouth and looked down at her with a faint smile. "You bit me so hard. It seems you're looking forward to tonight, en?" There was a bit of blood on the man's lips, and there was a small wound that she had bitten at such a close distance. However, the visual effect was so damned sexy. Jinwan raised her hand to cover her red and swollen mouth, forbidding him to continue kissing her lips. Chapter 583. She subconsciously wanted him to find a door to hide in, but the man in front of her seemed not to hear the knock on the door. He still held her in his arms and did not move further. He just kissed her on the cheek again. Then he let go of her, turned around, and went to open the door. Outside the door, there were two young girls who were in a hurry to enter the restroom. When they saw the man coming out, they were startled. However, the man was too handsome, and the two girls immediately swallowed their screams. They looked at the back of the man in disbelief. Even though he had just walked out of the women's restroom, he was still calm, as if he had just casually strolled in a supermarket. "Oh my God, he's so handsome. Shouldn't we be questioning why he went into the washroom? What if he's a pervert? Should we call the police?" "Call the police? How could such a handsome man be a pervert? Maybe he's just a toilet repairman." Have you ever seen a toilet repairman wear such an expensive shirt? Jinwan, who had just been pressed against the sink and kissed by the toilet repairman in the bathroom. Jinwan didn't return to the hotel in the afternoon. She had an itinerary that had been booked in the afternoon. She had been in Beijing for several days. Although MN Group didn't have many domestic partners in Beijing, there were many big shots in Beijing these days. And inevitably some of them would come here. So she had made a few last-minute appointments to meet them for business talks and social engagements. After lunch, Xiaohu sent Jinwan to the workplace. Jinwan asked Xiaohu to go back first and call him to pick her up after finishing work in the evening. But when she finished work, it was still not dark, and Jinwan had no intention of contacting Xiaohu. Fortunately, she had been careful these days and brought all her documents and things with her. It was very convenient to change hotels. The only inconvenience was that her luggage was still in the room of Shengtang Hotel. But it didn't matter. She could just call a nearby shopping mall to send her a few sets of clothes. So, the man who forced Jinwan to the sink in the restaurant's bathroom at noon and repeatedly said the word evening, with deep meaning, didn't see her return until it was dark. After 7 o'clock in the evening, it was dark, and the lights were on in Beijing. Mo Jingshan took the documents that Xiao Hu handed to him as he walked, and was about to return to his room when he suddenly paused and turned to look at the closed door of the unoccupied room opposite him. His dark eyes slowly narrowed. He had a hunch. This woman probably wouldn't come back tonight. Less than half an hour later, Mo Jingshan's hunch came true. Xiao Hu had just received a call, saying that Jin Wan had booked a room in a 6-star hotel 5 miles away from Shengtang Hotel. And it was a suite with perfect security facilities and other aspects. The door could be double-locked from the inside. Even if someone had the room card from the outside, they couldn't get in. After hearing Xiao Hu's trembling report, Mo Jingshan's expression did not change at all. He only calmly placed the document in his hand on the table by the side, his tone unhurried. Very good. After checking into a new hotel, a new room, and carrying 2 sets of new clothes that she had just ordered from the mall, Jin Wan breathed in the relaxed and free air as soon as she entered the room. She threw herself onto the bed, feeling that even the smell of disinfectant on the hotel bed was so lovely. Nowadays, many hotels didn't allow too many locking functions inside, because in recent years, many lawbreakers had done bad things in hotels, and there were often coma cases and murder cases. If there were too many locking functions inside, once something happened, the hotel staff wouldn't be able to detect too much, and they wouldn't be able to rescue them in time. So most hotels just locked the door or opened the door with a room card. In some particularly high-end hotels, a room card could solve all the locks inside and outside, such as Shengtang Hotel. It was useless for her to lock the door from the inside. If it weren't for the important work that had been added to her schedule these days, she would probably have flown back to High City. This hotel was found by her people nearby. It was not very far from Shengtang Hotel, only 5 miles away. If she really had to go to work with Mo Jingshan, it wouldn't take too long. It was rare to find such a good environment, advanced, well-equipped 6-star hotel that could be locked from the inside. As soon as she entered the door, she felt very relaxed. In the past few days, most of her schedule was with Mo Jingshan, so she had to stay in Shengtang Hotel. But from today on, she had basically figured out the schedule for the next few days. She still had to work alone most of the time, so there was no reason to continue to be tied to him. And the window of this hotel room was facing a famous lake in Jing City, and there was a medium-sized balcony outside the window. Jin Wan stood up, pushed open the window, and walked to the balcony. The sky had already darkened, and the headlights of the cars on the main street below the hotel were dazzling. The wind in Jing City was stronger and drier than in High City, causing the hem of her clothes to flutter. Jin Wan stood on the balcony and looked up at the night sky immersed in dark clouds. She felt that it would be mostly rainy in Jing City these days. Her cell phone on the bed rang. Seeing it was raining, Jin Wan turned back to the window, closed it, and walked back to the bed. The message was naturally from Mo Jingshan, and this man sent her a WeChat message for the first time in her 2 lives. This was probably the first time in her 2 lives that Boss Missouri had used WeChat. However, the WeChat message he sent was just a short 2-second voice message. Jin Wan clicked on it and heard the man's low voice. Escaped? Jin Wan was expressionless after hearing this. She glanced at the 2-second voice message in her hand, put the cell phone aside, picked up the new clothes she had bought, and went into the bathroom to take a shower. In the Shengtang Hotel 5 miles away, the man sat in front of an empty room, with only a 30-inch suitcase leaning against the wall, looking at his cell phone that had been quiet for a long time. Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes and looked down at the chat interface on the cell phone. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, she didn't reply? After leaving his sight, she began to return to her original appearance? Just as Mo Jingshan was about to put the cell phone down with a dark face, the cell phone suddenly vibrated in his hand, and there came the sound of a WeChat message. Chapter 584. Qin sighting. I've tolerated your profile picture for days. Why haven't you changed it yet? Mo Jingshan glanced at Qin sighting's disdainful tone and didn't reply. Then Qin sighting sent another message. I really don't mean to criticize you, but aren't you being too obvious by using Jin Wan's photo as your profile picture? Mo Jingshan replied expressionlessly. Do you have a problem with that? Qin citing. Of course I don't have a problem with that. But I wonder if Jin Wan will have a problem with that. Will she tolerate your increasingly shameless side? Mo Jingshan stared coldly at Qin Citing's sarcastic words. He suddenly remembered that a few years ago, Qin Citing had said on the phone that if there came a day when he, Mo Jingshan, wanted to find Jin Wan but couldn't find her, he would stab him in the heart with a knife, and let him have a taste of the pain of being stabbed by his brother when he couldn't say anything. Mo Jingshan still didn't reply. However, a few minutes later, Qin Citing sent a screenshot of a WeChat chat. The screenshot was the chat between Qin Citing and Jin Wan 2 minutes ago. Qin Citing. Today you asked about gastroenteritis. Whose stomach is uncomfortable? Jin Wan replied instantly. A friend. Qin Citing. So fast? Shouldn't you be resting at this time? Jin Wan. I just took a shower, and am lying in bed looking at my cell phone. I'll sleep in a minute. Qin Citing. Didn't you go to Beijing on a business trip? Not with Mo Jingshan? Jin Wan. No. Qin Citing. Laughing very good. Mo Jingshan looked at the few messages that Jin Wan replied almost instantly on the screenshot, and his face gradually became indescribably gloomy. Assassin Qin. You've taken her to Jing City, but you haven't settled it yet. I think Jin Wan has long given up on love, and doesn't love you at all. You'd better let go of her, and let her find another man to marry. Anyway, you're the one who let go of her first. Smile. Cute smile. Laughing. Seeing that Mo Jingshan didn't reply, Qin Citing had a hunch in his heart. He casually sent an emoji, and sure enough, he replied with an exclamation mark, saying that he was not Mo Jingshan's friend, and needed to be verified as a friend. Tut. Mo Jingshan, who was as calm as a god in times of trouble, also became angry out of shame. It seemed like he was right, thinking of Mo Jingshan's current situation, and then thinking of the scene when he saw Jin Wan standing like a ghost in the hospital corridor in Los Angeles. Although it was his own brother who was suffering from retribution, it was still an inexplicable pleasure. Jin Wan had a very good sleep and felt very secure. When she woke up and opened her eyes, it was already past 8 o'clock in the morning. She had an appointment at around 10 o'clock in the morning, which was nearby, so she was not in a hurry. She picked up her phone and glanced at it. It had been a quiet night. She then put down her phone, took a shower, changed her clothes, combed her hair and put on makeup. After he was done with everything, he was about to go out when Xiaohu called. CEO G, it's almost time for the schedule you arranged this morning. Shall I drive you there? Xiaohu's tone was a little tentative. After all, Jin Wan had stayed in another hotel last night. Right now, he did not know how Jin Wan was doing. There's no need. I'm very close to the place. If I take the subway, it's only a few stops away. I'll take the subway. Xiaohu. Okay, then tonight. Xiaohu originally wanted to ask Jin Wan if she wanted to go back to Shengtang Hotel tonight. After all, on the night she moved to another hotel, CEO Mo stayed in her room all night, and had not come out yet. However, before Xiaohu said this, he suddenly saw the door of the room next to him open. Mo Jingshan was still dressed in the same clothes as last night, but there were no wrinkles on his clothes. It seemed that he had not slept all night. After coming out, he did not speak, but looked at him indifferently. Xiaohu immediately choked back his words, briefly told Jin Wan about her schedule in the next few days, and was about to hang up the phone. However, just before he hung up the phone, he suddenly heard Jin Wan say, "If it's convenient, please find time to send my suitcase here tonight. After all, my computer and some other things are in the suitcase." Xiaohu didn't know whether he should agree or not, so he vaguely agreed and hung up the phone. Then he looked up at his boss's calm eyes. CEO Mo, COG just said that she would take the subway to the workplace today. Mo Jingshan didn't speak. Although he had not slept all night, his face was not tired, his eyes were cold and clear, and he said nothing. Xiaohu felt that the atmosphere was a bit oppressive, so he immediately smiled to ease his embarrassment, saying, "The traffic jam in Beijing is quite serious. If you don't drive, it's indeed more convenient to take the subway." He looked at the man whose expression did not change at all, thought for a while, and said, "In addition, COG asked me to send her suitcase tonight. COMO, should I send it to her?" "Yes," Mo Jingshan said indifferently. Before Xiaohu could see his boss's face, he had turned back to the room. That night, when Jin Wan returned to the hotel, she saw that her big suitcase had been sent by Xiaohu and was placed in the front desk on the first floor of the hotel. When the staff saw her, they took the initiative to push the suitcase to her. However, not only the suitcase, but also Mo Jingshan, who had been waiting in the hotel's VIP lounge, was also sent here. Knowing that Mo Jingshan was here, Jin Wan didn't say anything and went to the VIP lounge under the guidance of the staff. When she walked over, the door in front of her was just opened by the staff, and Jin Wan walked in. Their eyes met, and Mo Jingshan's dark eyes fell on the woman's face. Watching Jin Wan push her suitcase and walk in so casually, he didn't look away for a long time. Jin Wan glanced at him indifferently. She was not surprised that he would appear here, but she just glanced at him as if nothing had happened and didn't linger. The staff very sensibly walked out, leaving them some space, but the spacious room also fell into silence for no reason. Jin Wan gently held the handle of the suitcase and casually glanced at the environment of the lounge. Mo Jingshan's eyes fell on her face without any emotion, but he didn't look away. She suddenly turned back and was caught off guard by the man's deep eyes. They looked at each other for a few seconds. She smiled. CEO Mo Jingshan indifferently raised his eyelids. After this woman escaped from his encirclement, her tone began to carry the sound of alienation. These days, whenever she was forced to call out Mo Jingshan's full name in anger, the delicate and lovely tone she showed was drowned out by the sense of distance emanating from her bones. The feeling of being stabbed in the heart last night had faded, but Jin Wan clearly had no intention of explaining why she ran away from him and ignored his message. She even seemed to take it for granted. Her cat claws, which she had hidden, were indeed very sharp once they were revealed. Chapter 585. Mo Jingshan didn't speak, so Jin Wan didn't speak. But she couldn't keep wasting time like this. Jin Wan had just come back from outside. Today, she squeezed all her work into one day, trying to finish all the social engagements in 2 or 3 days, and then return to High City as soon as possible. At this moment, she was a little tired and didn't have the energy to deal with too many things. She said lightly, "For the next few days, I will complete my work in Jing City as scheduled. I will not miss a single thing. As for the few itineraries that I have to travel with you, I have already told Xiaohu. If the timing is right, I will go. If not, then we will go our separate ways." She looked at the man who remained calm and said with a smile, "After all, Shengtang Hotel is a hotel invested by your company, and many partners will also go there. It's really suitable for you to live there, but I'm different. I've hung out with you in the upper class of the Beijing circle for so many days, and met all kinds of big shots. Now it's time for me to go back to my original work. It doesn't matter where I live. After the trip, I'll go back to High City." "Jin Wan." She smiled. Mo Jingshan looked straight into her eyes, and his voice was indifferent and cold, as if he wanted to see the deepest part of her heart. "You really don't love me anymore?" Jin Wan paused and then slowly smiled. However, the man on the sofa kept looking at her quietly, and she couldn't smile anymore but just smiled. If it could be said that she had truly loved him deeply when they went through life and death together in Cambodia. If it could be said that she had stubbornly insisted on staying by his side when he wanted to divorce her, even when he scolded her for being a bitch, then it could be said that she had truly loved him to the point where she had no regrets. But she also knew how she had felt when she signed the divorce papers, and how she had survived the past 3 years. She remembered the day when she drank all night, stared blankly on the balcony of the hotel all night, and woke up and cut her long hair short. She might be touched or displeased by the fact that Mo Jingshan had an affair with another woman. Or perhaps she was just unhappy that someone had taken a fancy to what she once had. This was human nature, but she wasn't sure whether it was love or not, since even Mo Jingshan could clearly say that she didn't love him anymore. Perhaps her attitude was too arbitrary, and she had lost the hope of deliberately trying to make up for it. She didn't deliberately avoid him or approach him. Perhaps it was because she didn't spend any more time on him that he said she didn't love him anymore. Then maybe she really didn't love him anymore. Maybe, Jinwan replied after a long time. Why? Jinwan looked at him and suddenly fell into a trance. She then turned her face away and gently placed her hand on the handle of the suitcase, saying softly, "About 3 years ago, the child that had survived in my belly for more than 2 months and gradually began to have a fetal heartbeat was aborted. Perhaps the man I loved the most finally woke up, and my broken heart was frozen overnight. Even though you broke the ice on the surface with a reasonable and even considerate reason, the flesh and blood inside were still numb and cold." Seeing the man's dark eyes, she knew that he was also thinking about the baby, which was a sensitive point for Jinwan, and also for Mo Jingxian, so he often avoided this topic and never mentioned it. There were cars passing by outside the hotel, and not far from the lounge came the low voices of passers-by. Everything behind Jinwan seemed to become an illusory background. Mo Jingxian seemed to see through her indifferent face the woman he saw sitting outside 3 years ago when he woke up, and through the crack in the door of the ward, he saw the pale woman who had been waiting for him all this time. In these 3 years, it was as if she had silently endured everything that she could and could not bear. These 3 years had exploded in her body. She was strong because of the pain, but it was also because of her strength that she had sealed off many things that should have been soft in her heart. She learned to choose gains and losses, learned to bow her head under the eaves, and learned to find opportunities to break out of the cage. She seemed to be compromising, but in fact, the high wall in her heart was not destroyed at all. Jinwan said calmly, "Or maybe it's because I've lived 2 lives, loved madly, tried my best, and finally learned the whole truth. I'm just relieved, but I've already let go of many things that I should cling to. Mo Jingxian, in the past 3 years, I've learned one thing, that is, love won't kill people. It will only destroy my original faith, but it will also help me build a new one." It makes Jinwan fall asleep, so now I'm not Jinwan. So, since even you can ask this question, maybe it means that you don't love me anymore. Jinwan finally came to a shallow conclusion, seeing Jinwan's indifferent look when she said that she didn't love him anymore. Mo Jingxian remembered the dozens of messages she sent him 3 years ago, one of which was, "Mo Jingxian, I love you." But under his forced calm and indifference, he read those messages one by one, and deleted them one by one. Mo Jingxian didn't force Jinwan to go back to Shengtang Hotel. In fact, even if Jinwan went back, she wouldn't have much time to rest. At most she would sleep at night. She had nothing to do now. She squeezed all her work into a few days, and it didn't matter where she lived. She decided to stay in the hotel, which meant that she had officially entered the busy work of the business trip. And after Jinwan poured out all her heart to him, she returned to the gentle, cold, and untouchable person she was when she first returned to the country. Sometimes, Mo Jingxian's car was parked in front of the hotel where Jinwan was staying. Jinwan saw it when she came out, but she didn't go to their car. Instead, she went straight to the subway station, or got into the car of some business partners waiting outside. It was autumn in Beijing, and the weather had turned cold these days. After Jinwan finished her work at noon, she could have taken a break in the afternoon, but she suddenly received a call. It was Secretary Yang, who worked for Mr. Vince. She said that Mr. Vince suddenly had acute gastritis. Yesterday, when he was sent to the hospital, he learned that he had been having a fever for several days, and when he was sent to the hospital, he was unconscious. Chapter 586. When she arrived at the hospital, she learned that he had been sent to the hospital with acute gastritis yesterday, and had been transferred to a general ward for an anti-inflammatory injection today. Jinwan called Secretary Yang again. After confirming the situation, she bought some liquid nutrition products for gastritis near the hospital and brought them in. Because they had come to Beijing on a temporary business trip, there were no family members or people from the company here. Yesterday, some business partners must have come to visit, so today the ward was particularly quiet. Seeing Jinwan come, Secretary Yang went out. Jinwan walked over and saw Mr. Vince leaning against the bed with a pale face. He was still receiving in 4, and there were several needle marks on the back of his hand. It could be seen that he had received a lot of anti-inflammatory injections. What did I tell you the other day? I told you to go to the hospital as soon as possible. But you didn't listen, and suddenly became so serious. Did you go out to socialize and drink when your stomach was uncomfortable these days? Jinwan put down the nutrition products in her hand. Seeing her come, Mr. Vince was in a good mood although his face was not healthy. He said with a smile, I thought I could hold on. It's just gastritis. But I didn't expect to be knocked down by a few glasses of wine. Jinwan looked at him speechlessly and took the thermometer from his bedside. It's all right. It seems that you don't have a fever anymore. Secretary Yang said that she didn't know you had a high fever until yesterday. Your secretary is not very reliable. That day in the exhibition hall, I knew you had a fever. Why didn't she find out? She didn't stay in the same hotel as me. I asked her to go to several districts around Beijing for inspection, and didn't ask her to follow me all the time. Mr. Vince explained. No wonder. Jinwan sighed. The doctor said it's all right, right? Just gastritis. Mr. Vince nodded with a faint smile. What else could it be? If it were any other serious illness, do you think Secretary Yang would have the time to leave the ward to the two of us? Jinwan. At this time, he still didn't forget to flirt with a girl. She opened the things that she had bought. I bought some powders or pastes that are suitable for brewing. In your current condition, you should only be able to eat liquid food for a few days. Take care of your stomach, and don't drink for a while. People like us are always envied by others. It looks like we're especially rich, have a smooth life, and don't have to worry about anything. However, most of our investments and business deals were negotiated over drinks. Do you think that BGY's general manager is a freeloader? Talking about business while drinking is also a skill. It's much more useful than your drinking capacity of a few glasses. Jinwan chuckled. That's right. Being a poor drinker has its advantages. At least it won't irritate your stomach like this. I think you're risking your life to do business. It's not as serious as you make it out to be. Have you ever been drunk before? Mr. Vince asked with a smile even though he knew the answer. Jinwan paused, but her hands didn't stop unpacking the supplements. She just said lightly, I was drunk but I haven't been drunk for a long time. All these years in London, she had actually been slightly drunk. Although she said she was drunk, she wasn't completely drunk. At the very least, she had always been sober. All these years, she had to maintain her sobriety at all times to prevent her heart from falling. Their conversation shifted from wine to other topics. Jinwan was used to talking about work in front of Mr. Vince. In the past, it was like this in London, and it was the same after returning to China. In the past, to prevent him from talking about their relationship and causing awkwardness, she would always find topics to talk about. Now she didn't need to deliberately find topics to talk about, but this habit of talking had been formed. But this was also good. At the very least, it wouldn't be awkward. What exactly is going on between you and COMO? After chatting for 2 hours in the ward, Jinwan originally planned to let Mr. Vince close his eyes and sleep for a while. But after a moment of silence, his voice suddenly rang again. This time it was no longer just about work. Jinwan's hand that was casually flipping through the phone paused slightly. She looked up at him, and happened to meet Mr. Vince's eyes. Her eyes fell back on the phone, and her fingers slid open WeChat. She replied to Xia Tian, who had just sent her a message. Then she accidentally saw the WeChat message below that she hadn't replied to. The man's name was still blank, and so was his WeChat moments. But his profile picture was still hers. He hadn't changed it, or he didn't intend to change it at all. She gently pressed the screen of the phone with her finger and smiled. What else could it be? We were just married before. Later, when we were in the same business circle, we inevitably met, and had some minor friction. It seems that he doesn't intend to let you go. How did you two get divorced? Are you sure you've already divorced? Jinwan didn't understand why he asked this. She immediately felt a little amused. I signed the divorce agreement. After that, I went to the UK. As for the divorce procedures, I think even if I didn't go to the Civil Affairs Bureau in person, he would have the ability to handle the divorce. Why do you ask me this? Mr. Vince's expression faltered. You didn't go to the Civil Affairs Bureau? Jean-Wan also paused, feeling that he seemed to be implying something. Why? Mr. Vince's eyes darkened, but he sighed helplessly with a smile. Jean-Wan, this is a society ruled by law. Since your marriage with Mo Jingshan was carried out in China, not registered abroad, a divorce is not as simple as a piece of paper. No matter how capable he is, to complete the divorce in China, in addition to your signature, he has to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau in person. Even if Mo Jingshan is the king of heaven, he can't do it for you in person. The corner of Jean-Wan's mouth twitched, and a corner of her heart sank. What do you mean? Although this is not a very optimistic situation for me, I still suggest you re-examine your relationship with Mo Jingshan. Are you sure you're divorced? Jean-Wan. How could he not be divorced? For the sake of her life, Mo Jingshan had made such a huge change. He had forced her to leave and forced her to live in England alone. She had to face the unknown for the next 3 years alone. He had even taken the cruelest step. How could he not divorce her? Besides, he had sent the divorce agreement to her first, and she had sent it back to him after signing it. Although the man's column was blank when she signed it, he should have signed it immediately after receiving it. Signing divorce. Every step was the same as in her previous life. Chapter 587. Unless, in her previous life, they hadn't divorced completely. Seeing Jean-Wan's bewitched look, Mr. Vince frowned. Have you ever seen what a divorce certificate looks like? Jean-Wan put her hand on her lap and didn't speak. She just looked up at him. Aren't there many kinds of divorces in China? With the power of the Mo family and Mo Jingshan's ability, as long as I sign my name, I can get it done, can't I? Mr. Vince gave a rare sneer. Naive. Jean-Wan didn't speak. In the afternoon, she sat with Mr. Vince in the hospital for a while and talked about other things. At sunset, when the doctor came into the ward to take him for a stomach examination, Jean-Wan got up and left. On the way back to the hotel, she took out her mobile phone and looked up various questions on the internet about whether a person must be present in the divorce proceedings. The answers she found were all the same. Both parties must be present at the same time. This was a legal condition for divorce proceedings. The taxi stopped in front of the hotel. The driver looked back at her, only to see that she looked puzzled after looking at her cell phone. Then she closed her eyes and leaned against the seat, as if she was about to fall asleep. The driver stopped the car and woke her up. Miss, we've arrived. Are you not feeling well? Do you need me to take you to the hospital? Jean-Wan immediately opened her eyes, which were not sleepy at all. No. With that, she paid the taxi fare and got out of the car. Before returning to her room, she picked up her cell phone and wanted to call Mo Jingshan to ask him about it. However, when she thought of a certain possibility and recalled how heartless she had been to him that day, she felt it was unnecessary to call him now. Forget it. She'd better finish the business in Jing City as soon as possible and go back to High City as soon as possible. The next morning, when Jean-Wan woke up and turned on her cell phone, she was suddenly bombarded by several messages. Xia Tian, what happened to you? Picture. Jean-Wan zoomed in on the picture Xia Tian sent and saw that it was a gossip section of a financial newspaper. There was a color photo on it. The scene in the photo was Mr. Vince's ward in the hospital yesterday. Jean-Wan was feeding Mr. Vince, and both of them had smiles on their faces. They seemed to be very close. From the angle of the photo, one could tell that it was taken by a medical staff or a passerby through the small square window on the door of the ward. They didn't expect that people in the business circle like them would be recognized by passers-by, and even spread the photo as gossip. The business world wasn't as complicated as the entertainment world, but some famous bosses or top-notch professionals were often interviewed by the media. Gradually, people would recognize them. What's more, the real estate industry had gained a lot of attention in the country. Therefore, many people had seen the names and photos of some of the people in charge of large domestic real estate groups like BGY. The caption on the photo was, The reason why Forbes #1 young female entrepreneur returned to China was because she fell in love with BGY Group's general manager. After seeing this report, Jinwon didn't reply to Xia Tian's message. Instead, she made a phone call and asked someone to inform the media to quickly withdraw this messy news. MN Group might not be powerful enough to turn the clouds and rain over their hands, but she still had the ability to suppress this kind of gossip in the small financial news media. Furthermore, financial newspapers didn't have as much attention as entertainment newspapers. She had to withdraw the news and the photo before it was spread out. After dealing with the media, persuading, pressuring, and several other methods were used, the other party finally obediently withdrew the report that was originally going to be posted online. They also planned to publicly apologize for the false report and the act of fabricating a story based on the photos submitted by passers-by in the newspaper tomorrow. It was already afternoon. Jinwon had several social engagements to attend today. She was going to have dinner with several partners in Beijing, so it was inevitable that she would drink some wine. She had booked a car in advance to pick her up at the club when it was time. After arriving at the entertainment club, Jinwon shook hands and chatted with the bosses of several business partners. Because they were all old friends who had worked with her for a long time, Jinwon didn't feel particularly restrained tonight. She didn't restrain herself when eating and drinking. Of course, she knew her alcohol tolerance, so she didn't drink too much. During this time, there were many people who asked her about the news with Mr. Vince today. Jinwon smiled and said she was just going to visit an old friend. However, she didn't expect that a passerby would take a photo of her outside the ward and spread it. She explained that she had been single all these years, and that if she really had a boyfriend one day, she would make it clear. Seeing that her words were very clear, and that there were not so many messy rumors in this circle, they laughed it off and continued to talk about business as usual. In the second half of the show, it was already 10 o'clock at night. It was raining heavily outside the club, so the bosses suggested waiting for the rain to stop. They arranged a large room in the club to play cards, sing, and drink a few cups of wine. Jinwon was slightly tipsy. She was in a good mood because she had just talked about a very good project, so she went to join in the fun. After 3 rounds of drinking in the private room, the bosses were playing cards. Jinwon drank a little too much tonight. Holding a can of beer that had just been opened, she walked to a corner of the luxury private room on the top floor of the club and looked at the semi-curved French windows. It was raining heavily outside. She held the beer in one hand and pressed the other against the window. Through the thick glass, she looked down at the lights of Beijing. But she was not in the mood to appreciate the rain and the waning lights. Her mind kept echoing with Mr. Vince's words about whether she was really divorced. The more she thought about it, the more she drank, and the more sober she became. It was almost 12 o'clock at night, but the rain did not stop, and was even getting heavier. The car Jinwon had booked had been parked outside for a long time. The driver called her several times, but she did not answer. The private room was too noisy, and Jinwon did not hear it at all. Because she drank too much, she forgot that the driver would come to pick her up. When Jinwon finally remembered it, it was already 12:30 at night. She picked up her cell phone and called the driver, staggering out as she spoke. She had just arrived at the elevator door and was about to step in when she saw Mo Jingshan suddenly appear in the elevator. She paused in her footsteps. Chapter 588. The moment she met the man's gaze in the elevator, Jinwon's legs froze. Was she hallucinating because she drank too much? Why did Mo Jingshan come here at this time? However, before she could say anything, the man walked out expressionlessly and glanced at the room behind her, which reeked of alcohol and was still filled with people singing in karaoke. Jinwon tried to straighten herself up, but the man only approached her. She subconsciously tried to move aside, but the moment she moved, she swayed. Just as she was about to fall, her waist was suddenly tightened. Mo Jingshan easily held her waist, and then lowered his eyes to coldly glance at her. First, you went to the ward to flirt with that person from BGY, and then you came out in the middle of the night to socialize and drink with these people. You even got yourself drunk. Is this how you use the reason you don't love me to declare war on me? Jinwan's mind was in a mess. She couldn't understand what he was saying at all. She instinctively raised her hand to push him away. But the moment her hand touched the man's shoulder, her whole body fell uncontrollably into his arms. The moment her head bumped against his chest, she frowned and struggled to move back. But the man held her in his arms and showed no signs of letting her go. Mo Jingshan, let go of me. I'm not drunk. Jinwan heard the elevator door open and close. She staggered as she was held by the man into the elevator. Finally, she was brought in. She raised her hand and pushed and hammered him twice. But she couldn't push him away. So she gave up struggling and just leaned in his arms motionless. However, the more she breathed in the familiar scent of the man, the more drunk she seemed to be. She tried to shake her head to clear her head. But before she could move her head, the hand that was on her shoulder pressed her down heavily, and her entire body was pressed into his embrace. Yu. Jinwan's face was pressed against his chest. For a moment she could barely breathe. She forced her head away, but her mouth was moaning. I'm really not drunk. I can still recognize you as Mo Jingshan, really. The man didn't speak again until she was taken out of the club. There was a car parked in front of the door. Jinwan looked outside and suddenly smiled, mumbling, "Ah, it's raining. Ah, it's raining so heavily. Ah, good." Before she finished speaking, the man pressed her head into the car. Jinwan was pressed into the car. She was so drunk that it was impossible for her to sit in the passenger seat. Now she was almost lying on the back seat. She tried to get up, but after a long time, she could only lie there weakly. Then she frowned and held her stomach. This posture made the liquor in her stomach shake back and forth, and she felt a little nauseous. Do you want to throw up? Seeing her holding her stomach, the man asked before closing the car door. Jinwan didn't respond and still lay on the back seat. She wanted to move, but she didn't have the strength. As soon as she moved, she felt dizzy and her stomach churned. Seeing that she didn't speak, Mo Jingshan closed the car door. The car drove fast. The driver and the car that Jinwan had arranged to pick her up were left outside the club. She couldn't remember anything at all. The hotel she was staying in was not very far from the club, but it was still 5 miles away from Shengtang Hotel. The car stopped at the door of her hotel. In the heavy rain, the car was washed by the rain and glowed coldly. The moment the door opened, Jinwan suddenly sat up with strength. When the man was about to take her out, she pushed him away hard, jumped out of the car, rushed into the rain, and vomited on the ground. She had endured until now and didn't vomit on the car, which was the last reason she had in her drunken appearance. Ugh! After vomiting for a long time, she only vomited a lot of alcohol. She didn't eat much in the evening, but she drank a lot, especially a lot of beer. Jinwan's alcohol tolerance was only limited to foreign wine or champagne, but she still couldn't handle domestic white wine and beer. Fortunately, the rain was so heavy that the alcohol she vomited was instantly washed into the roadside sewer and disappeared in the blink of an eye. After vomiting out a lot of alcohol in her stomach, Jinwan's legs softened, and she almost knelt on the ground. At the moment when her knees almost touched the ground, her abdomen suddenly tightened, and the man took her into his arms in time. He looked down at her who was standing in the rain, but still hadn't woken up, and still had a dazed expression. The man's expression was cold as he lifted her up in his arms and helped her stand firmly. Do you still want to throw up? He asked. His tone was obviously angry, but he didn't take it too seriously, because she was not sober enough. Jinwan looked at the man in front of her in a daze, shook her head, and then suddenly looked like she was going to vomit again. She tried to push him away again, but this time, she didn't push him away. He took her to the side and helped her bend over to vomit, lest she lost her balance and fell to the ground. This time, she didn't vomit much. She probably drank too much and stayed in the car for so long. She felt so uncomfortable because of carsick and the after effects of being drunk. After vomiting for a while, Jinwan was completely exhausted and didn't even have the strength to struggle in Mo Jingshan's arms. She leaned weakly in the man's arms with her legs weak. Seeing that she was almost done vomiting, Mo Jingshan carried her in his arms and strode into the hotel. The hotel staff saw Jinwan, who was soaked in the rain, being carried in by a man who was also soaked in the rain. The staff had an impression of Jinwan and knew that she lived here. But the man carrying her originally, they wanted to step forward to ask or help. But when the man carried her into the elevator, he cast a cold glance at them, causing them to stop in their tracks. They didn't dare to take a step closer. Jinwan's room card had her floor and room number written on it. When she was carried in, she frowned and subconsciously raised her hand to scratch the door, mumbling, "No, Mo Jingshan. This is where I live, get out." The man didn't seem to hear what she was muttering and directly brought her in. Chapter 589. Jinwan was placed on the sofa. Her wet hair stuck to her neck and cheeks. Her eyes, red from the alcohol, were slightly open. She stared blankly at the man in front of her, who did not lose any of his temperament even after being drenched in the rain. Since she said those words to him that day, she had not thought of facing him again. Right now, her head was dizzy and her body was heavy. She simply sat on the sofa and did not move. Although Jinwan had drunk too much, her habits in recent years had allowed her to maintain a little bit of rationality. Even if she was really drunk, she would not talk nonsense. Even if she really wanted this man to get out of her room, she raised her hand slightly, put it down, and did not speak in the end. After getting drunk and vomiting, the only thing left to do now was probably sleep. However, the man's voice rang when her thoughts were about to return to chaos. "You were just drenched in the rain. Do you want to go in and take a shower? Or do you want me to take off your clothes here?" Jinwan's mind paused. She opened her eyes and looked at the man in front of her in a daze. "You, don't talk nonsense. Go in and take a shower." Jinwan looked at him, and then at the bathroom not far behind him, and did not move. It was not until the man bent down to carry her from the sofa into the bathroom that she hurriedly dodged his hand, as if she had been electrocuted. She staggered to her feet and walked to the bathroom, but still could not stand steadily because of the alcohol. She supported her hand on the wall for a while before she walked in and closed the door. She was not in the mood to take a bath, so she just turned on the shower head to wash herself. Then she remembered that she had just vomited, so she grabbed the spare disposable toothpaste and toothbrush in the hotel bathroom. After brushing for a long time, she did not know if there was any taste of alcohol on her body or in her mouth. She lowered her head and sniffed, but could not smell anything. She stood under the shower head in a daze. Her eyes were still a little dazed, and she could not stay completely sober. But she still remembered that Mo Jingshan was outside, so she took a little longer to shower. Half an hour later, she put on a bathrobe, casually dried her hair, and went out. When she went out, her hair was still dripping, and the water droplets submerged in the bathrobe, making it a little cold. She showered after being drenched in the rain, but the man was not in a hurry to shower. His soaked suit jacket was thrown on the sofa in the room that could only accommodate 2 people. Due to the color of his black shirt and trousers, it was hard to see any changes after being drenched. Jinwan stood outside the bathroom door, but her footing was a little unstable. She turned around and leaned against the wall to support herself. She forced herself to stay sober as she said, "My work in Jing City is almost done. Tonight is my last social engagement. Perhaps thinking that I can return to High City tomorrow, I felt relieved and drank a little more, but I'm not too drunk." Hearing that she would return to High City tomorrow, the man did not move, but his eyes fell on her. Because Jinwan had just showered and was drunk, her cheeks looked redder than usual, and her eyes were dazed. She was not as firm and indifferent as she had been that day when she stood in front of him and said that she no longer loved him. She stood against the wall and said indifferently, "My ticket back to High City has been booked. The flight is tomorrow afternoon." The man just sat there coldly and quietly watching her. Jinwan raised her hand to touch her still wet hair. When she felt the water on her head, she frowned uncomfortably. She wanted to go back to the bathroom to get a towel to wipe her hair. But then she paused and thought of something. She said, "Did you see the news that I went to the hospital yesterday?" She paused and said, "In the past 3 years, if I had accepted any man's pursuit, I wouldn't have been able to stand here now. whether it was Mr. Vince or any other man. When I didn't know the reason for the divorce, after the divorce, I had the right to pursue happiness at any time. Even if I really have an ambiguous relationship with any man, or have feelings beyond friendship, it doesn't violate any morality, and it can't even be considered as having an affair. Besides, she had rejected Mr. Vince countless times, and had never responded to him emotionally. This time, it was only because Mr. Vince was sick that she took the initiative to care about him. In her eyes, she only stood on the side of friendship. She was used to doing things her own way, and didn't care what others thought. Perhaps because she hadn't vomited all the wine in her stomach, or perhaps because it was too hot when she took a shower in the bathroom, Jinwon could only stay awake for a moment. She couldn't remember what she was saying, but from the man's eyes, she could see that she seemed to be saying something particularly heartless. She still felt like vomiting, so she turned back to the bathroom and rushed into the toilet, but nothing came out. The man didn't say anything, because of what she said just now. He threw a towel to her head. "Wipe your hair clean. I'm going to buy some hangover medicine." Jinwon didn't speak. She just raised her hand and pressed the towel that almost covered her entire head over her head. It wasn't until she heard the door open and close that she pulled the towel down and wiped her face mechanically. After drying her hair, Jinwon walked out of the bathroom. She was a little thirsty and went to pour herself a glass of water. However, while her body was weak, she couldn't even hold the glass firmly. The glass of hot water that wasn't hot fell to the ground before it reached her mouth. Fortunately, the water wasn't hot. Jinwon stood by the table, watching the water spilled on the carpet and the glass that fell to the side. She stared blankly for a long while before she came back to herself. She raised her eyes and looked out the window at the heavy rain that was still falling. The floor she lived on was very high. What floor was it? It seemed to be the 30th floor of a hotel. From here, she could see half of Jing City brightly lit under the rainy night. Jinwon poured herself another glass of water and carefully picked up the glass to drink, but her hands were still so weak that she could barely hold it. She held the glass with both hands, but in the end, before the water reached her mouth, it spilled all over her. She gave up and kicked away the 2 cups that had fallen to the ground with an ugly expression. She raised her hand and touched the wet bathrobe. She felt a little hot in her head and listened to the sound of rain outside the window. She really wanted to feel the cool breeze to wake herself up. Chapter 590. So cold. So comfortable. In the past few years, because of her cold body, she had been very careful not to touch or drink anything cold. Even on the hottest days of summer, she did not dare to drink ice water. Suddenly standing on the ice-cold ground full of water stains, with the cool rain falling on his head, extinguishing the unreasonable heat on his body. It was really comfortable. Jinwon stood numbly on the balcony, facing the rain and wind. She closed her eyes and allowed her freshly showered body to be baptized by the heavy rain again. She allowed her shoulder-length hair to fall on her shoulders and breathed in the damp and cold smell of the rain. In her handbag in the room, her cell phone rang. Jinwon ignored it as though she did not hear it. She opened her eyes slightly to watch the heavy rain, a smile on her lips. The rain was so heavy that she did not hear the sound of Mo Jingshan opening the door when he came back. When she finally heard the sound, the man had already pushed open the half-closed floor-to-ceiling window behind her, making a loud noise. Jinwon was so frightened by this voice that her shoulders involuntarily shrank back. She turned around, her eyes blurred by the rain as she stared at the man whose expression was cold and ugly. "What are you doing?" The man's voice was even colder than the autumn rain. Jinwon, who originally felt very comfortable in the rain, could not help but shiver in her heart. She looked at him in a daze, and her lips, which had been washed white by the rain, moved. Watching the rain, Jinwon's current appearance was indeed sober, but it was also true that she had drunk too much. Her hair was all wet, and the wet bathrobe was cold and heavy on her body. The towel that she had used to dry her hair was placed on her shoulders to withstand the baptism of the autumn rain, and her face was full of rain. But this indescribable abjection made it seem as though she had shed the cold and arrogant mask of the past 3 years. shed the so-called shell of no love, and stood here in a daze. Jinwan tilted her head slightly, and from the corner of her eyes, she saw that the man was holding something he had just bought from the pharmacy. Who would have thought that the great Mo Jingshan would one day run an errand in the rain to buy medicine in the middle of the night? He was clearly also wet, but he always made it seem as though she was the one in a more sorry state. She could not help but smile again. However, she laughed until the man's face turned even uglier. Jinwan's wrist was suddenly tightened, and before she could make a sound, she was dragged from the balcony into the window by the man. Then the floor-to-ceiling window was slammed shut, and the curtains were blown up by the wind from the force of the slamming of the window. In the end, the curtains fluttered back into the window. You just took a shower, and now you're out in the rain. Don't you feel how cold and bone-chilling the autumn rain is in Beijing? With the way you torment yourself, I think you won't be allowed to board the plane tomorrow afternoon, because of your high fever. The man gripped her wrist tightly, causing Jinwan to stumble and almost fall into his arms. She managed to steady herself, but still swayed because her legs were weak and her head was dizzy. The man's hand caught her waist at the right time, preventing her from falling down. Because of her swaying and the sudden strength of his hand on her waist, Jinwan felt her entire body tremble. The feeling of the world spinning came back again. She immediately narrowed her eyes and furrowed her brows, but did not explain anything. She pursed her lips and pushed him away. If it weren't for the fact that Jinwan's complexion was too pale, Mo Jingshan would definitely have said harsher words. However, seeing that the little woman was so drunk that she could not tell north from south, and was forcing herself to act as though nothing was wrong, the man's expression was heavy as he brought her to the sofa. He tossed the hangover medicine in his hand aside, and reached out to undo her rain-soaked bathrobe. However, Jinwan abruptly raised her hand to cover the collar of the bathrobe. She struggled for a moment. I'll wash myself when I want to. Haven't you already bought the hangover medicine? I'll drink it myself. Go. The man's hand paused on her collar for a moment. Jinwan did not look at the man's eyes and turned away to leave. However, her feet staggered, and the man's long arm reached out to pull her back. Jinwan was slightly flustered because of the dampness on her body and the heavy bathrobe. She angrily raised her hand and used all her strength to push and hit him. However, even if she used all her strength, she would not be able to do much to this man. She raised her half-conscious eyes to glare at the man's ink-like deep eyes. You'll shower yourself? You'll make your own hangover medicine? If you could do that 3 years ago, you wouldn't have soaked in the hotel bathtub for 2 days and 2 nights, and almost lost your little life. With that lesson in mind, I won't leave until I see you obediently clean yourself up. If you have the strength, why don't you hurry up and take a hot shower? Feeling the coldness on her body, the man furrowed his brows and directly untied the belt in the middle of her bathrobe. Jinwan frantically held onto the bathrobe that was about to fall open. When the man raised his hand to help her take it off, she struggled to lower her head to bite him. However, after a long while, she was unable to bite him. She was so angry that her eyes turned red. She angrily scolded, Mo Jingshan, you bastard! Don't take off my clothes. You don't remember what I said that day, do you? The man's hands did not stop moving. As he touched her body, he felt that the originally cold temperature on her body was gradually turning hotter and hotter. He suspected that she had already developed a fever from the rain when she came back. However, Jinwan continued to hold onto his chest and refused to let go. Her mouth kept muttering indistinctly until she said hatefully, I said I don't love you anymore. I don't love you anymore. Mo Jingshan, you're not allowed to take off my clothes. I don't love you. Get lost. Before she could say anything worse, in the next second, the man abruptly pulled her to the front with great force. As she was about to continue scolding him with reddened eyes, he held the back of her head and kissed her. The cool, masculine scent that carried the dampness of the rainy night covered her lips. It was not a simple kiss like before. He directly pried open her lips and penetrated deep and heavy. Jinwan's brain that had been numbed by alcohol instantly stopped moving. She trembled in the man's embrace and bit him hard. She took the opportunity to struggle to say, I don't you. Even the root of her tongue felt as though it was about to be seized. Jinwan's entire body trembled. She raised her leg to kick him, but the bathrobe was too heavy. Her feet were only indoor shoes and did not have any offensive power. Instead, the man's strong fingers locked onto her waist. It was as though he was about to squeeze her into his body. Just as Jinwan was about to bite him, he harshly took her lips and brought her back. She was heavily thrown onto the sofa. Chapter 591. He pressed her under his body, trapping her firmly like an invisible lock. Jinwan fell onto the sofa. Because she was lying under him, her eyes revealed some panic. Mo Jingshan was above her, ignoring all her struggles and kicks. He looked at her with his deep, ink-like eyes, and the flames of calmness were burning quietly. Under his gaze, Jinwan felt flustered. She quickly moved her eyes away, only to see the man's slender and well-defined fingers unbuttoning his shirt. His clothes had also been drenched by the rain, but they were still black. The collar gradually opened, and the man's Adam's apple rolled in front of her eyes. Jinwan's entire body tightened. "Say it again, you don't love me, Anne?" The man pressed her down with one hand and took off his clothes with the other. He didn't have the time to continue kissing her, but his voice and tone were so heavy that she could clearly feel that he was really provoked by her. Jinwan watched as the man's well-dressed shirt was unbuttoned. She wanted to move back, but her legs were pressed down by the man's knees. She pushed him hard but to no avail. Seeing the man's chest becoming clearer and clearer in front of her eyes, she felt a loud bang in her head. Her bathrobe, which was soaked in water, was already open because the strings were undone. The man could easily take off her bathrobe. When he pressed her down, Jinwan raised her hand to block him. "Mo Jingshan, what do you mean? What are you doing?" The next moment, the man held her wrist and pressed her against the sofa. Mo Jingshan lowered his head, and his breath sprayed on her cheek. "You." Jinwan didn't react at first. When she finally understood what he meant, her eyes immediately turned red. However, before she could speak, the man's kiss fell again. This time, he didn't let her escape easily. Jinwan didn't know what he meant. She didn't know what he meant. Her hands and feet were restrained by the man at the same time. This kiss was not gentle at all, and because she kept trying to bite him, it was stained with the smell of blood. Mo Jingshan had always been too indulgent with her. When she refused, he didn't really force her. But at this moment, being pressed against the sofa by the man, Jinwan clearly felt that the man was using the most primitive physical force to suppress her. This kiss was full of invasion and plunder, and she couldn't stop trembling under him. "No, you." Jinwan was still struggling, but the heavy bathrobe on her body had been taken off. She wasn't wearing any clothes at all. The man blocked her lips. Her hands were held against the back of the sofa by him, and his knees were pressed against her, so that she couldn't move at all. His deep, scorching, conquering kiss moved down from her lips, down her neck, down to her collarbone. She had never seen him like this before, and he didn't. He didn't look as he usually did. The more she struggled and resisted, the more he wanted to suppress her. The more she struggled, the more he lost control. Whether it was his lips, hands, or the strength of his hands, he couldn't control them at all. They gradually became heavier, and the burning temperature of Jinwan's body made the blood of the man, who was supposed to be sober, gradually boil. He didn't have the slightest intention of letting her go. Jinwan was naked because the bathrobe had been thrown off the sofa by the man, but the man was still wearing everything except for his unbuttoned shirt. Her hands were held by the man, and her eyes were red with anger. She gritted her teeth and called out his name. "Mo Jingshan." The man's kiss fell on her lips again, stopping her from cursing. At the same time, he slowly bit her lips that had been kissed red and swollen. Jinwan's whole body was limp and trembling, and even the hands between their bodies softened. Even her hair was messily spread on the sofa. It was a kind of embarrassing and helpless feeling. "Mo Jingshan, I drank tonight, but I'm still sober. Don't take advantage of me." The man held her waist with one hand and supported himself by her side with the other. His dark and hot eyes stared at her unscrupulously. His thin lips moved slightly, and his voice was low, husky, and firm. "It's not sober or not. You're the one who knocked yourself against my gun. I'm not taking advantage of you. Today, I'm going to take you. Jinwan stared at him in disbelief. Her breath caught in her throat because of his words. She hurriedly pushed him with all her might, but the man easily restrained her hands with one hand and pressed her into the sofa with even more force. Jinwan panicked. You, however, before she could finish her words, the man bent down to kiss her again, from her lips to her cheeks, to the sensitive area by her ear, and finally sucked on her earlobe. Under this action, Jinwan's legs were still pressed down. She wanted to move, wanted to struggle, wanted to hit him with something, but could not do as she wished. She even wanted to say that she did not love him, but every time she opened her mouth, the man would cover it. She could not even say a complete word. When Jinwan's hands were pulled down by him again, her expression faltered. Her whole body trembled uncontrollably under the man's deep, yearning gaze. You can't make it through tonight. Even a cold shower is useless. Be good, En? The man's breath landed by her ear, and his voice was too low and husky. His words were telling her that no matter what, he would not give her any room to retreat tonight. However, it was clear that Jinwan did not have any room to escape. She suddenly regretted drinking so much. Right now, her whole body was weak, and she did not even have the chance to resist. After not doing it for more than 3 years, Jinwan's heart was slightly empty and lost. She remembered that 3 years ago, this man had pressed her against the door of that ward in Los Angeles, saying that he was going to stab her heart with knife after knife. She remembered that in her first year in London, she had tasted the taste of failure and stayed up all night, working like a machine every day. She remembered that Auntie Chun had said that after she signed the divorce papers, he had smashed up the entire Yew garden. She raised her hand to scratch the man's face harshly, but the moment she raised her hand, he caught her wrist. The man's thin lips pressed against her ear, and his voice was heavy and husky as he said, "Right now, any movement of yours will agitate me to the point of losing my mind. If you don't want to be hurt by me, be good and don't move." Jinwan bit down harshly on her lips that had turned white. This man was actually threatening her. Chapter 592. The crisp sound of his belt unbuckling could be heard. Jinwan abruptly raised her upper body to escape, but the man pressed her back onto the sofa. Even at this moment, she still refused to yield. However, under the man's control, under the control of a man who understood her too well, once she fell into his hands, there was no way for her to resist at all. Taking advantage of the moment he released her leg, Jinwan raised her leg to kick him. However, before she could kick him, her ankle was abruptly caught by him. After being separated for more than 3 years, this woman's body felt as though it was her first time. Jinwan's face paled from the pain. She abruptly turned around and harshly bit down on the man's arm. Mo Jingxian was not much better off. Earlier on, she was already showing signs of having a fever. Her body was already burning hot. The man could not help but raise his hand to hold her chin. He lowered his head to kiss her lips. However, Jinwan continued to struggle violently. She did not cooperate at all. Her limbs were not under her control. She was completely under the control of the alcohol. She wanted to hit him, push him away, and did not want him to be satisfied. Why did he have the right to do whatever he wanted? Why did he think it was for her sake that he could hide everything and push her away so cruelly? In the end, he only casually said it was all for her. Why was he able to control everything so calmly? Usually, no matter how forceful Mo Jingxian was, at the very least, he had always considered her feelings and never forced her. Even before their divorce, he had never forced her. But now what did this count as? He actually dared to force himself on her. This bastard. Scum. He had nothing to do with being a gentleman. He was a bastard. The battle was intense. In the past few years in England, Jinwan had been wearing some skincare products to prevent her skin from turning red and swollen, due to her acclimatization. 3 years of taking care of her skin had made her skin even more tender, delicate and white, and even more sensitive. If he used a little more force, it was easy to leave marks on her body. Looking at the uneven marks on her body, it was as though Mo Jingxian was bewitched and could not stop. He patiently kissed every inch of her body. The night fell. If Jinwan was said to be a hedgehog whose thorns had been forcefully plucked, then Mo Jingshan was transformed from a dignified CEO boss into a bandit. She couldn't even remember if she had said a complete sentence last night. She only had a vague impression of a few sentences. She vaguely remembered that the man's breathing was clearly erratic, but his low and calm voice was close to her ear, asking again and again, "I'm asking you, do you still love me?" As long as he didn't get the answer he wanted, he would find another way to torment her. Until Jinwan gave a satisfactory answer, almost sobbing, "Dawn." Jinwan couldn't get up at all. She couldn't even get up. The little woman's hair was a mess. Her face, which was pale from being bullied last night, was now extremely red. She hadn't woken up since dawn and had been in a deep sleep. The only thing he could touch was the scalding heat on her body and forehead. Last night, Jinwan had been burning hot. It was so hot that Mo Jingshan had almost lost his rationality. He was immersed in the heat and ignored her hoarse cries. It was only when he held the thermometer he had requested from the hotel staff and saw that it showed 39.6 degrees that he finally regained his composure. Jinwan was still sleeping. His fingers brushed aside the hair on her face, revealing her abnormally red face. Half of her face was buried in the pillow, and she looked miserable and helpless. After sleeping for an entire day, she finally showed signs of waking up. When she opened her eyes, even though she was still lying on the bed, she still felt as though the entire world was spinning. She furrowed her brows in discomfort and closed her eyes again, trying to ease the dizzying feeling. Chapter 593. Her body felt heavy, and her entire body was aching. She could not muster up any strength, but her body felt refreshed, unlike last night when she was sweating profusely under the man's body and tossing the bed into a mess. She must have washed her body thoroughly. Even her hair was clean and fluffy, smelling like shampoo. When she opened her eyes, she found herself still in the hotel room. At the same time, she felt a faint discomfort and soreness in her lower body. She did not even need to think to know that everything that happened last night was real. Jinwan opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling and overhead lights. She was still in a daze and did not understand how things had developed to this point. She turned to look at the sky outside the window. It was getting dark. It was clear that she had missed her flight back to High City. However, she was still in a daze. She raised her hand to touch her forehead, only to feel a rectangular patch. She peeled it off and looked at it. She then closed her eyes to ease the dizziness in her head. She cursed Mo Jingshan hundreds of times in her heart. He clearly knew that she had a fever last night, but he actually did it for an entire night. Based on the situation last night, if it weren't for the fact that she had paid attention to training her body and persisted in exercising over the past few years, which improved her constitution, she would have probably died from overindulgence last night. He even used this kind of patch. Furthermore, she felt weak even when she thought about it. It was easy to guess that her fever was not low. In addition, she had a hangover from last night. No wonder she felt so uncomfortable, as though she was suffering from vertigo. Jinwan was still lying on the bed, fighting against her spinning head. However, after struggling for a long time, she still could not sit up. Even the slightest movement of her head made her feel as though the world was about to turn upside down. The hangover was really uncomfortable. She turned her head to look at the hangover medicine in the corner of the sofa. Mo Jingshan knew that she would feel uncomfortable when she woke up, so he bought this for her. However, in the end, not only did she not drink it, it even turned into she put the heat relief back on her head, put her hand down, and turned her head. Suddenly, the man's handsome face and tall figure appeared in her line of sight. She saw that Mo Jingshan was still in her room. Although he was wearing clothes, the clear scratches on the man's neck caused her eyes to stare. Those were the scratches she had left on his body last night, when she cried until her voice was hoarse. Jinwan immediately sat up, but her movement was too abrupt. Before she could glare at the man, she abruptly fell back. Although her head did not hurt when it hit the pillow, the dizziness made her moan uncomfortably. She raised her hand to her head and moaned in pain. The man was holding a glass in his hand. Seeing that she had fallen back onto the pillow, he walked over and said in a low voice, "Lie down and don't move. Take the antipyretic when you wake up." Jinwan glanced at the glass of water and medicine that the man had placed on the bedside table. Before she could speak, the man had already reached out to help her up. He placed the soft pillow behind her back, so that it would be easier for her to drink the medicine. Jinwan did not have much strength. Seeing the man's attitude as though nothing had happened, her eyes almost turned red from anger. Even the events of last night rushed into her mind. Her heart was filled with anger. Without even half a second of hesitation, she sat up and pushed the man who was about to feed her water down the bed. How could she have the strength? Earlier, she had not been able to sit properly. Mo Jingxian was not pushed off the bed, but the glass of water in his hand was almost knocked over by her. He steadied the glass and placed it by the bedside. At the same time, he held her wrist with his other hand. When Jinwan almost fell head first onto the bed, he hugged her. "You've had a fever for an entire day and night. Don't toss about. Obediently take your medicine." Jinwan raised her head to look at his lazy and calm appearance. She adjusted her beard several times before spitting out a complete sentence. Her voice was cold and stifled. "So you know that I've had a fever for an entire day and night? Then why didn't you stop last night? I begged you so much, but you wouldn't stop. Do you want me to die?" The man still sat down by her bedside. Under her icy gaze, he caressed her burning face as though comforting her. There was a smile on his lips as he warmly said, "The more you beg me, the more I can't control myself. I'm sorry. In the future I'll be gentler." "You're still thinking about the future?" Jinwan immediately glared at him coldly. After a night of indulgence, Jinwan was completely naked. When she saw that Mo Jingxian was dressed neatly, her anger grew. However, no matter how she tossed and turned, the only words she could think of was to scold him. In the future, there would definitely be no future. She wanted to hit him, but the man had already placed the medicine in her mouth. As the bitterness spread in her mouth, he brought the glass of water to her lips. Jinwan had no choice but to quickly drink the water to swallow the medicine. However, her throat was dry and painful. After drinking so much water, she choked for a moment. The moment she coughed, the man placed his hand on her back and gently patted it. Yet, even with such patience and gentleness, it could not erase his violent actions last night. Last night's battle was intense. The clothes he wore on the sofa could no longer be worn. This set of clothes must have been sent over. Seeing that he was dressed and no longer had the unstoppable manner he used to bully her, Jinwan coughed several times and turned her head to continue coughing. She did not even want to look at him. "When the sun rose, I called the doctor over and gave you some medicine. You were drenched in the autumn rain, right after taking a hot shower. The cold air invaded your body too quickly, causing your fever to persist. Take your medicine on time and rest well. Once your fever completely subsides, you'll be fine." The man's hand was still pressed against her back. When Jinwan coughed again, he patted her again. Jinwan wanted to push him away and get off the bed. However, the man's actions appeared patient and gentle, yet he kept her firmly on the bed. He had no intention of letting her get off the bed so easily. "Are you sure you can get off the bed in your current state?" The man's tone was calm, yet his words seemed to carry a double meaning. Her current state. This reminded her of something. Jinwan pushed him again, but to no avail. In the end, she could only struggle with the quilt beside her. She pulled the quilt up and covered herself with it, covering her naked body and the red and purple marks on her body. Seeing that she still had the energy to argue with him, even though her face was flushed red from the fever, Mo Jingxian chuckled softly. "Lie down properly. I'll help you cover it." Jinwan tugged at a corner of the blanket, angrily saying, "There's no need." Chapter 594. However, the man suddenly let go of her, and she immediately fell onto the bed as soon as she pulled the quilt back. The moment she lay back, she turned her head with a jerk, only to see the man's thin lips slightly curved, as if laughing at her for overestimating herself. She was so angry that she rolled her eyes and covered her head with the blanket. "I just took the medicine. Wait a minute. Someone will bring food over in a while." If you don't have the strength, I'll feed you. With your fever like this, you need to have the most basic strength to compete with me. You should know what's best for yourself. The man's voice came from outside the quilt. Jinwon didn't speak under the quilt, but she did have a serious fever. She didn't sweat even after being under the quilt for so long. If she did sweat, her fever would probably go down. After a while, when she felt the man sitting by the bed get up and leave, she slowly pulled the quilt back down. She stared at the darkened sky outside the window and confirmed that she had really slept the whole day. At this time, she really didn't have the strength or energy to think about anything. Since she had missed the flight back to High City, even if she wanted to go to the airport now, it was likely that she couldn't book a ticket for the same day. Besides, she really couldn't get up now. She had just been tortured last night. There was no need to make things difficult for herself now. She opened her eyes to look at the sky outside the window for a while, gradually closed her eyes, and accidentally fell asleep. Half an hour later, Mo Jingshan received the dinner delivered by the hotel staff outside. When he brought it in, he saw that the little woman was still sleeping on the bed, curled up into a ball under the quilt, as if she was particularly insecure. She was curled up into a ball again. She didn't wear anything, and instinctively wrapped herself tightly in the quilt. Before dawn, he carried her to take a shower. He originally wanted to help her put on clothes, but she was tired and confused. After putting him on the bed, she cried and struggled to stop him from touching her. In the end, she wrapped herself in the quilt and shrunk to the corner of the bed. Motionless, she closed her eyes and sobbed as she fell asleep. Seeing her pitiful appearance, he gave up and didn't insist on helping her put on clothes. Although he couldn't bear to wake her up now, she hadn't eaten anything all day. When she was unconscious during the day, he had tried his best to feed her the medicine. If she didn't eat anything now, the medicine would be enough to make her stomach feel uncomfortable. Not to mention that she had consumed so much energy last night under the condition of a fever. Eat before you sleep. Mo Jingshan pulled her out of the quilt. Jinwon was in a daze when the man suddenly dug her out of bed. She instinctively frowned, and before she opened her eyes, she heard the man ask her in a low, husky voice. Vegetarian dumplings, tofu soup, vegetable porridge, and a few side dishes. What do you want to eat? Jinwon opened her eyes to see the man's face so close to hers. Realizing that she was being held by him, she immediately scrunched up her feverishly flushed face. She turned her head away to look at the tray, and the things on it on the table not far away. She closed her eyes and said in a hoarse voice, I want to eat teriyaki chicken, Manchuhan Imperial Feast, sushi pizza, barbecued pork dumplings, salmon. The man quietly listened to her. You can eat after your fever subsides. Right now you can only eat bland food. Hearing this, Jinwon lifted the quilt to cover her head. She said impatiently, Then I won't eat. She then turned to lie down on the bed and leave the man's embrace. However, just as she was about to roll onto the bed, the man easily pulled her back and forced her to sit on the bed. If you don't eat, do you plan to maintain this state when you wake up tomorrow morning? You can't even sit up. Jinwon sat up with the man's help and immediately said angrily, There's no taste in my mouth. I don't want to eat such bland food. The man nodded. Just as Jinwon was about to lie back on the bed, he leaned down and kissed her hot lips. Jinwon suddenly shivered and pushed him with all her strength. However, she only managed to push the man's lips away by a finger's length. She was about to argue with him angrily when the man lowered his head and kissed her again. Jinwon trembled for several seconds. The man held the back of her head and did not restrain himself despite her resistance. Instead, the kiss deepened. Their lips and tongues intertwined. Especially when she was sober and not drunk, she could easily recall the scenes from last night. Her scalp instantly turned numb. She had no strength to push him away. In the end, she was forced to raise her head to receive the man's kiss. Her fingers involuntarily tightened around the man's clothes. Just as she was in a daze, the man released the back of her head and stopped the kiss. Just as Jinwon was about to fall back weakly, he held her waist and held her in his arms. Jinwon had yet to react when the man casually said, still bland, Jinwon, I'll carry you over. Mo Jingshan, I'm not wearing any clothes. Just as the man's hand was about to pull her out of the blanket, Jinwon hurriedly tightened her grip on the blanket. The man paused for a moment before getting up to retrieve a loose and easy-to-wear blouse from the suitcase she had left in the room. He came back and helped her put it on. Only then did she release the quilt that she had been clutching tightly to. The man buttoned the blouse for her one by one, and then carried her horizontally. When she was carried to the table where the dinner was placed, Mo Jingshan placed her on the sofa closest to him, asking, "What do you want to eat?" Jinwon did not speak. She only glanced at the dishes on the table, before looking at the vegetable porridge and tofu soup. The man did not ask further, and placed the two dishes she had been staring at in front of her. He originally wanted to hand her the cutlery, but when he saw her leaning against the sofa weakly as though she had no bones, he picked it up and scooped it up with a spoon, bringing it to her lips. "Open your mouth." Jinwon originally did not want to cooperate, but she did need strength. She could not continue wasting time like this. Furthermore, Mo Jingshan had ignored her cries and begging last night and had been beastly. Right now, even if he were to serve her while she ate, it would not be too much. Thus, Jinwon opened her mouth and swallowed the vegetable porridge with a hint of vengeance. Her gaze was still cold and hateful as she stared at the man in front of her. Yet, when this man was serving her while she ate, he sat by her side with his back straight, elegant and stern. His cold-toned shirt was immaculate, and his movements were so natural that it made her feel as though she was a small animal he was personally feeding. Small animal. Chapter 595. Mo Jingshan did not expose the little woman's vengeful and angry thoughts. When she received the bowl and obediently lowered her head to eat, his lips curved slightly. His tone did not change as he said, "Eat, it's not hot anymore." Jinwon did not speak, lowering her head to focus on eating. After eating, before she could speak, the man had already carried her back to the bed. This kind of carrying, Jinwon's throat felt uncomfortable. She coughed and did not speak. She sat on the bed and remembered her phone. "Mo Jingshan, bring my bag over." Hearing the woman's commanding tone, the man only took a deep look at her. He took the bag and handed it to her without a word. Jinwon unzipped it and took out her phone. She saw that there was only 4% battery left. She was about to charge it when she unlocked the phone and saw several missed calls. Some of them were from the driver from last night. She had originally arranged for the driver to bring her back to the hotel, but in the end, she drank too much and was brought away by Mo Jingshan from the club. The driver had not been able to contact her. It was likely that after asking the others and learning that she had left, he left. She couldn't have caused him to wait outside for an entire night, right? As Jinwon pondered, she looked at the other missed calls. They were all from her colleagues. Aside from those she knew, only the company would call her. After hurriedly returning a few calls to her colleagues and the driver, Jinwon raised her hand to touch her head. It seemed like it was still burning, and there were no signs of perspiration. Finally, when she returned the call to Xiaoba's nagging voice could be heard from the phone. "Boss, why did you only receive news now? From this morning until now, you haven't replied to any of my calls or WeChat messages. You've really made me anxious. If I had known, I wouldn't have let you go to Jing City alone. I would have been more at ease if I followed you." Jinwon lowered her eyes and calmly replied, "What's wrong? Why are there so many urgent matters?" "Actually, it's not that urgent. It's just that Mr. Zand came over from London. It's been several months since our company moved back to the country, but Mr. Zand hasn't come over to take a look. This time, he came to discuss business and dropped by High City, but you weren't here. He just dropped by High City to take a look, or did he specially come to find me? It should be along the way. But didn't you always say that Mr. Zand is your master? When we first went to London, he was the one who took you with him. I thought you'd feel sorry for missing out on his trip to Sea City. What's there to feel pity about? I haven't seen him look for me many times in the past 2 years in London. He has invested in many companies under his name and personally led them. He is my teacher, but his students are all over the world. What's more, when I wanted to look for him, he was wandering around in other countries, and had no time to deal with me. Now he probably has some business to discuss in Sea City, so he came to see me. If he can't see me, then so be it. I don't think he will stay for long. You were right. After learning that you weren't in Sea City, Mr. Zand left not long after. He didn't tell us to pass you a message. It seems like he was just passing by. Jinwan chuckled. This kind of busy person who flies all over the world. If he doesn't have a goal, he basically doesn't have time to sit around. I think he saw that MN Group has officially moved back to the country and wants to discuss some cooperation with me in the country. Then you don't plan on working with Mr. Zand anymore. It depends on his sincerity. If he really wants to talk, he will call me later, or come to High City to look for me. Jinwan said mildly. Jinwan said indifferently, and looked up to see that Mo Jingxian was still looking at her, as if he was simply judging her attitude toward the company and her words and actions from the conversation she had on the phone. After speaking a few more words with Xiaoba, she hung up. At the same time, she was about to charge her phone, but her charging cable was by the sofa. She directly handed her phone to Mo Jingxian. Help me charge it. Her tone was still arrogant and bossy. The man took another look at her matter-of-fact attitude and accepted it. He turned to help her charge it, and at the same time, lifted his lips to speak mildly. Mr. Zand is an excellent corporate architect and financial analyst in England. In recent years, under his guidance, there have been many successful companies that have gradually entered the business circle. Your company is one of them. However, it's clear that MN Group is the only Chinese company that he has supported. You haven't let him down. In his eyes, you have a lot of potential. If he still wants to cooperate with you in the future, just accept it. After Mo Jingxian finished speaking, the air suddenly fell into a strange silence. Jinwan sat on the bed and was about to lift the blanket to cover her legs when she suddenly paused. Her gaze shifted to the man, who had just placed her phone on the table along with the charging cable. She watched his tall and straight back as he straightened up. 3 years ago, Mr. Zand had visited High City and suddenly extended an olive branch to her studio. He said that many of her business concepts, ideas, as well as her foresight towards property and other industries were very optimistic. After that, he had a long discussion with her, saying that he would help her remodel her studio and that he could help her build a business empire. At the time, Jinwan felt that this person was just boasting and did not pay much attention to him. Later on, when her heart was like dead ashes and she decided to leave, she did not know what she was thinking. She suddenly thought of Mr. Zand and decided to give it a try in London. At the time, she only thought that another business partner had introduced her to Mr. Zand. She had never thought otherwise. For someone of Mr. Zand's status, he was someone who had reached the acme of perfection in the eyes of many new companies. How could he possibly favor a small studio like hers? Did you arrange for Mr. Zand to come over? The matter of him bringing me to England was also arranged by you long ago? Jinwan abruptly asked. The man saw that she was about to lie down in that light-colored smock. The smock was made of linen, so it wasn't comfortable to lie down and sleep in it. He casually went to her suitcase to help her find her pajamas. At the same time, he said faintly, this kind of corporate creator who flies around Tian'an High City would obediently accompany you for a year. Is it hard to guess the reason behind this? Jinwan. Chapter 596. Thus, whether it was helping her or watching her grow up when she encountered difficulties, but when she needed support, he invested a sum of money in her. Although he appeared to be a very realistic and cold-blooded person, he had only done so to train her. Thus, from the beginning until now, every step she had taken in the past 3 years had been within Mo Jingxian's plans. There was not a single mistake. So Mr. Zand, her so-called teacher, the person who helped her build the MN Group, had been arranged by her side by Mo Jingxian's side? Jinwan only felt that a certain understanding was about to collapse from her mind. Some things that had been confusing her seemed to gradually become clear in her mind. Her lips moved before she asked in disbelief. So, in the past 3 years, you know everything that happened to me in England? The man brought out her pajamas and came over to help her change into them. Jinwan did not have the strength to struggle. In any case, struggling was useless. She allowed the man to take off her blouse and help her put on her pajamas. At the same time, he tucked her shoulder-length hair out to prevent it from being uncomfortable in the pajamas. Jinwan raised her chin, still looking at the man's perfectly curved jaw. "Mo Jingshan, explain it to me clearly." The man looked at her, his hands still resting on the end of her hair. His long, slender fingers moved through her hair. "If I could really control many things, I wouldn't have to force you to divorce and force you to leave with a cold heart to solve all of this. There are always things that I can't fight against myself." Jinwan looked at him and did not speak. The man's hand landed on her back, seemingly comforting her gently and confirming the thoughts in her heart. His voice was quiet and indifferent. "During the 3 years you were in London, although it was my arrangement, I didn't interfere in anything, nor did I try to find out. The only thing I did was to hand you over to someone who I could let go of in peace before you left." Jinwan looked at the man's handsome and deep face. For a moment, she did not know how to describe such a man. He could quietly devise strategies under the seemingly supercilious state. He could have strong self-control and motivation to save her life. He could also make her believe that he really didn't love her, when he should have made her believe that he really didn't love her. Now, when he wanted to get her back, he made her realize that this man's thoughts were deeper than the sea. It turned out that there were so many things she didn't know about him. It seemed that from the beginning, she did not know anything. She could be willful, she could act recklessly, she could take revenge because of hatred, she could grow up, she could do whatever she wanted. She thought she was already very successful, but when she did not know anything, he knew everything. Jinwan pursed her lips and did not speak for a long time. Seeing her dark eyes, the man placed his hand on her forehead and then on her neck. "It's still very hot. When you were unconscious, your temperature only dropped to 38.7 degrees. Now, I'm afraid it's still not lower than 38 degrees. Take your temperature again. If it still doesn't drop, I'll find a way to lower your temperature." With that, the man moved his hand away from her neck. However, Jinwan sat motionless on the bed, staring blankly at the buttons on his chest, and said hoarsely, "Mo Jingshan." Hearing the emotion in her voice, Mo Jingshan took a look at her. He did not respond, but he did not walk away either. Jinwan slowly raised her eyes. Her eyes were red, and tears were rolling in them. After a long time she said, "You're too scary." The man narrowed his eyes at her complicated emotions. Before he spoke, Jinwan suddenly grabbed the pillow on the bed and slammed it against him. She did not scold him anymore, but bit her lip hard and slammed the pillow against his face, chest, and shoulders. If she really wanted to hit him, she wouldn't have used the pillow, but she used it. Obviously, she needed to vent her anger, but she didn't want to hit him too hard. Mo Jingshan stood by the bed and did not move, allowing her to attack him with the pillow. He allowed her eyes to turn redder and redder, and her tears to fall more and more fiercely. It was hard to tell whether her eyes were filled with love or hate. Perhaps there were both. She loved everything he had done for her, loved him from the beginning to the present, and hated his strong, calm, and terrifying self-control. She hated him for dragging her from heaven to hell, as if nothing had happened when she lost her child. People were most afraid of love and hate, but she had experienced it. People were most afraid of living for too long only to fall for the same person, but she had experienced it too. She was tired from hitting him, but she still forcefully threw the pillow at him. The sturdy white pillow in the hotel was almost deformed by her hands. She didn't know whether she used more strength to hit him or to pinch the pillow. She only knew that she had nowhere to express her feelings. If she didn't vent them, she would really explode. Jinwan. Seeing that she was tired, Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at the woman's red eyes and messy hair, calling her name in a low voice. Jinwan didn't seem to hear him, but she seemed to hear him, because she suddenly increased her strength and slammed the pillow against his face. The man abruptly tugged the pillow that she had been clenching tightly against, and reached out to pull her into his arms. Jinwan's hands were empty, and without warning, she hit his chin, but she didn't even stop. She struggled with all her might in his arms, punching and kicking. Her hands kept hitting his neck, his shoulders, his chin, and even his face. Although her manicured nails didn't scratch his face, they still left several red marks on the side of the man's face. Her tears soaked the front of his shirt, and Mo Jingxian asked her to calm down several times, but she didn't seem to hear him and continued to slap him. The man abruptly lowered his head and kissed her tear-stained and salty lips. He pressed her harshly against the bed, suppressing her body that had been moving non-stop. He locked her in place with absolute strength until she gradually fell limp under him. She stopped moving, but stared at him with reddened eyes filled with resentment. The man finally sighed softly against her lips and kissed her cheeks, eyes, kissing away the salty wetness on her face. "All right, I only ate a few mouthfuls. If you keep tormenting me like this, it'll be digested in no time. If you're sick, you have to act like you're sick. After the fever goes down, I'll stand still and let you hit me, eh?" The man's hand caressed her face, pushing aside the hair stuck to it. Chapter 597. Jin Wan raised her hand to hit his face again. This time, the man held her wrist, lowered his eyes and pressed his body against hers, staring at her. "Look at you. Are you going to use all your energy and strength to hit me for the rest of your life?" The man's voice was light and indifferent, without the slightest sense of irritation like hers. It was as if he was simply asking her what she wanted to eat tomorrow. Jin Wan's lips trembled in anger, but she could not speak. After a long time, she could only squeeze out a few words. "You're too scary." Mo Jingxian slightly curved his lips. "I'll take that as a compliment." She turned her head away abruptly, refusing to look at the man's infuriating smile. She never expected that everything she had experienced in the past 3 years, including her struggles, changes and growth, was all under his control. She thought she had already soared, but it turned out that he was the one who held her back. Jin Wan wriggled in his arms again. Her tears had dried up, but they were still red. Her fever had not subsided, and her cheeks were also red. She looked as if she was about to be cooked. The man gently touched her hair and rubbed it comfortingly. "All right, don't make trouble. I think you've used up most of your strength." He had guessed correctly. Jin Wan didn't know where the strength came from. She hit him crazily for a long time, but most of her strength was used on the pillow. At this moment, her whole body was sore and soft. She could not even lift her arms. She could only move her body faintly, but because their bodies were so close together, she could feel the changes in the man's lower body with every movement. When she felt that her lower abdomen was being rubbed by him, Jin Wan immediately glared at him fiercely. "Shameless, dirty bastard. I'm already like this, but you're still hard." The man was still thinking about how to coax her, but he was instantly amused by this woman's words. He looked at her deeply and rubbed her hair patiently. "I thought you knew my desire for you last night. It's been more than 3 years. Do you think it can be filled in one night?" Jin Wan was expressionless, but her eyes and face were red. Even if she was expressionless, she did not look so cold. In his eyes, she looked cute. The smile in the man's eyes grew wider. "You don't know how much restraint I had to use to endure it after having sex last night. If you hadn't fainted from the fever today, I would have used another method to make you lie in bed for a day and a night, crying until you couldn't find your voice." "Jin Wan," she frowned. "Don't press down on me. Get up." The more he lay on top of her, the more she moved, the more dangerous she was. In her current state, she definitely couldn't take another round. "No more?" the man asked in a low voice. Jin Wan closed her eyes and turned away. "I don't have the strength." Her answer was ambiguous, but the gist of it was that if she still had the strength, she might do it again. The man smiled, patting her head as though he was playing with a child. He then released her and stood up. At the same time, he glanced at the hair and sweat on Jin Wan's forehead, saying, "It's not like all this was useless." At the very least, the sweat finally came out. Jin Wan was startled. She raised her hand to touch her head. As expected, she was sweating. This meant that her fever would go down soon. Jin Wan did not move anymore. She turned around on the bed and closed her eyes to rest. Seeing that she was sweating more and more, It seemed like her fever was really going to go down. Mo Jingshan turned to the bathroom to prepare a bath for her. Several minutes later, the man came out to see that Jin Wan was still lying in the middle of the bed with her eyes closed. She was not using a pillow as a pillow, and was lying there quietly. It was clear that she had not fallen asleep. You sweated for a while. After your fever goes down, go take a bath. The water is ready. Jin Wan ignored Mo Jingshan's words, and did not move from the bed. She was indeed not asleep. Earlier on, when Mo Jingshan was in the bathroom, she kept her eyes open to look out the window. When she heard him come out, she closed her eyes again. At this moment she was sweating nonstop. The pajamas that the man had just forced her to change into were instantly soaked with sweat. He didn't know how serious her fever was for the whole day. She finally sweated, but in the end she sweated so much. Mo Jingshan watched as the little woman lay there motionlessly, drenched in sweat. Mo Jingshan walked over, placing his hand on her sweaty forehead, and touching her flushed face. Jin Wan did not move, nor did she avoid his hand. She only opened her eyes to look out the window, refusing to look at him. Her temper was quite bad. Mo Jingshan asked softly, "Should I carry you to take a bath?" She still did not move. This time, she turned her face even further away. She did not even want to look at him from the corner of her eyes. The man casually picked up the electronic thermometer by the bedside and measured her temperature. As expected, after sweating, her temperature had dropped significantly. Right now it was only 37.2 degrees. He placed the thermometer down, his long arms directly carrying the woman, who looked as though she had just been fished out of the water due to her sweat. Before Jin Wan could struggle, the man had already carried her to the bedside. Furthermore, he did not mind her sweat at all. His hand gently patted her back through her damp pajamas. Even if you want to throw a tantrum, you have to choose the right time. Jin Wan did not want to pay attention to him. She did not want to speak to him. Just looking at him made her angry. Seeing her uncooperative expression, Mo Jingshan did not let go of her. He unhurriedly placed her on his lap, encircling her in his embrace. At the same time, the man's low and heavy voice rang above Jin Wan's head. "Tell me, what do I have to do to appease your anger?" Jin Wan could not tell if she was angry or something else. It was just that there were many things that she could not immediately digest. But he had never told her any of this. He had always kept it a secret. It was as though her every conscious or unconscious decision and action were all predicted by him. Right now, she did not have the strength to struggle against him. However, being held in his arms, she raised her eyes to see the man's calm and indifferent expression. It was as though no matter what he did, he was always right. It was as though everything was within his expectations, including her every emotion. Right now, she was like an insensible little woman throwing a tantrum. Her hair stood on end in his arms. "Mo Jingshan, have you ever thought about my feelings?" Chapter 598. Right now, Jin Wan's attitude toward him was exactly the same as that day when she coldly said she no longer loved him. It was as though he was dispensable, and she did not care about anything. She had her own temper, but it was not big. She only harbored some thoughts of revenge, and always wanted to stab a knife into his heart. However, it was rare to see her so angry when she threw the pillow at him. "I don't need you to accommodate me. Move your hand away." No matter what she said, he had no intention of letting go. Jin Wan wanted to twist out of his arms, but she remembered that the man couldn't take any teasing right now. If she moved around in his arms like this, it would only do her no good. In the end, her expression turned ugly. "I'm all sweaty. Even if you don't dislike me, you still dislike me. Let me take a shower. You still have strength. I'll carry you over? No need. I can do it myself." Mo Jingshan lowered his gaze to look at her sweaty little face, and then at her furrowed brows. In the end, he still released her. After Jin Wan got off the bed, perhaps because her fever was no longer as bad, although she had used up most of her strength, she did not feel as dizzy as before. She steadied herself and went straight into the bathroom. Amidst the rising steam in the bathroom, Jin Wan raised her hand to scratch at her similarly sweaty hair. She glanced at the bathtub that Mo Jingxian had filled with water, and bent down to sit by the bathtub. She stared at the water in a daze for a while. Finally, the man suddenly knocked on the bathroom door. His low voice was calm yet somewhat warning. "I want you to go in and take a shower, not hide from me. If I don't hear anything for more than 5 minutes, I'll go in at any time." Jean Wan removed her sweaty pajamas and threw them onto the washing rack by the side. She then entered the water and sat down in the bathtub. She did not have any strength, but she did not need to wash herself in this bathtub. She only needed to sit in it, and the jacuzzi that came with this kind of star hotel would have the function of taking a bath. The water pressure from all directions washed her body rhythmically. From time to time, some white bubbles would bubble up. Soon, the entire bathtub became like a bubble bath. Jean Wan just lay motionless in the bathroom, letting herself be washed clean. She looked up at the light in the bathroom. In the end, the bath was so comfortable that she almost fell asleep. About 2 minutes after she closed her eyes, there was another knock on the bathroom door, and the man's deep voice rang out. "Don't sleep in there." Jean Wan. Did he install a surveillance camera in the bathroom? How could he predict everything she did? She had chosen this hotel to stay in. After Mo Jingxian brought her back from the club yesterday, this was the first time she had stayed here. It was unlikely that there would be any surveillance cameras. Jean Wan's gaze instinctively scanned the bathroom once. She then changed the bathtub's water and washed for a while before getting up. However, when she lowered her head, she saw that even though she had bathed several times, the marks on her body were still very obvious. She really could not figure out how perverted Mo Jingxian was last night. From head to toe, he really kissed her all over without missing an inch. And it was while she was still unconscious from the fever. Jean Wan pulled a long face and stepped out of the bathtub. With one foot in the bathroom slippers, she took a step forward with the other and reached out for the towel on the silver metal rack. However, her feet suddenly slipped, and she abruptly fell to the ground with a thud. Thankfully, her reaction was fast. Instead of falling straight down, she twisted her body slightly and landed on her bottom. Ah! Almost at the moment when Jean Wan gave a low cry of pain, the bathroom door was quickly opened from the outside by the man. As soon as Mo Jingxian entered the door, he saw Jean Wan sitting on the ground naked with a pale face. She looked as if she had fallen on her butt. The man quickly walked over and bent down to carry her up. However, Jean Wan held her bottom with one hand and pointed upward with the other. "Towel, give me a towel." Mo Jingxian casually tugged down a towel and wrapped it around her body. In an instant he helped her up. "How are you? Did you fall badly? How could you fall after taking a bath?" Jean Wan also wanted to ask if she and Mo Jingxian had a mutual nemesis. Why did she not do so many embarrassing things in the past few years in London? Her days were peaceful, but the moment she was in front of him, she would either have a fever or fall. Was this man his nemesis? Earlier there was too much foam in the bathtub, and it flowed out. "I didn't notice. I didn't expect the floor to be so slippery," Jean Wan explained. Her hand was still held behind her. Her expression changed from one of anger to one of awkwardness and grievance. Seeing that she still had the mood to put on an expression, it was likely that her fall was not serious. Mo Jingxian carried her up, walked out of the bathroom, and placed her on the bed. The moment Jean Wan's bottom touched the bed, she shifted back slightly and wrapped the towel that she had casually wrapped around her body. However, the towel was only so big. It could only cover her from her chest down, neck, collarbone, shoulders, and chest. The marks left by the man last night, as well as her pale rosy skin from soaking in the bath for too long, were all exposed to the man's eyes. Jean Wan was stared at by the man for a moment. She abruptly pointed at her luggage. "Help me bring another set of pajamas." The man glanced at the bathrobe she was wearing. "How many sets of pajamas did you bring over?" "2. Mo Jingxian immediately smiled. "The remaining set is the pink halter top nightgown." The moment Jean Wan recalled the style of that nightgown, she immediately fell silent. Last time at Shengtang Hotel, he almost couldn't control himself when he saw her in her nightgown. If it weren't for her period, he would have eaten her up that night. But that day wasn't much better. Her hands were sore for a long time before they were relieved. From the way I see it, there's no difference whether you wear it or not. But it was still better than being wrapped in a towel that barely covered her thighs. Bring it. I want to wear it. Mo Jingshan did not say more. If she wanted to wear it, he would let her wear it. He continued to search for pajamas in her luggage without any complaints. Finally, he brought out the soft pink silk nightgown and brought it back to the bed. I'll help you wear it. I'll do it myself. Jinwan raised her hand. Mo Jingshan handed the nightgown to her. After receiving it, Jinwan lifted the blankets and changed into the nightgown. The man's dark eyes watched as the little woman hid under the blankets to change into the nightgown. When she put down the blankets, the pink halter top fell into his eyes. Chapter 599. Indeed, she might as well just lie on the bed with the blankets covering her. She was dressed like this, and even exposed all the evidence he had left on her body last night. It was a complete challenge to the little bit of self-control he had left because of her illness. He handed the thermometer to her and turned to leave, saying, "Check the temperature again. If you don't have a fever, you don't need to take the medicine." Jinwan took it, measured it herself and said, 37 degrees. The man grunted and didn't speak. He didn't even look at her again. At this moment his cell phone rang. Jinwan took the opportunity when the man went to the window to answer the call to get out of bed. She picked up her cell phone that had been charged for a while and walked to the bed with it. She heard the man's indifferent tone when he answered the call. It seemed to be a call from a company in America. Judging from his indifferent tone, it was mostly related to Los Angeles. Only then did Jinwan remember that MN Group had moved back to China and only needed to go to London to deal with some matters. But Shine Group's headquarters was still in America. After all, High City was only a branch. Mo Jingshan would be back for a long time this time. But he would eventually return to Los Angeles, wouldn't he? Last time, he had casually mentioned it to Mr. Vince. Shine Group was a company with a deep foundation in America for decades. It couldn't be moved as easily as MN Group. That was where Shine Group's foundation was. After all, he couldn't stay in High City for too long. It was already dark. Jinwan leaned against the bed, but couldn't fall asleep. There was only one big bed in her room, and Mo Jingshan didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. He slept on this bed last night. Could it be that he planned to sleep here again tonight? Jinwan looked at her cell phone and glanced at the bathroom from time to time. Hearing the sound of water, she knew the man was taking a shower. When the bathroom door opened, she withdrew her gaze and continued to look at her cell phone. There was no need for her to ask. Not long after the shower, the man went straight to the bed. It was as if they were really a married couple who had never divorced. The moment Jinwan sank down on the bed, she glanced at the time and suddenly pursed her lips. "I'm hungry." The man didn't stop lifting the quilt. After moving closer to her, he glanced sideways at the little woman's expression, which was obviously looking for trouble. He didn't expose her. "What do you want to eat?" Jinwan had only eaten some porridge, which was digested quickly. It was already past 10 o'clock at night, almost 11 o'clock. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was hungry. "Noodles, please." Jinwan lowered her eyes and continued to look at her phone, not looking at him. "Since I can only eat bland food now, I can only eat noodles." The man took the phone. "I'll get someone to go to a nearby noodle shop to pack a bowl for you. I don't want to eat food cooked outside." "Then where do you eat? From the hotel?" "I want to eat your cooking." The man did not speak. Jinwan paused and turned to see that he was looking down at her. She quickly looked away and continued to watch the movie on her phone. She said faintly, "Can't I?" "Forget it then. If this is Shengtang Hotel, I can ask them to vacate a kitchen for me at any time. And I can cook noodles. Right now you chose this hotel yourself. I'm not sure if their kitchen can be vacated right now." Mo Jingshan did not seem to have any intention of rejecting her. His tone was patient and gentle. Even if she was purposely making things difficult or sending him away, he did not have any objections. "Oh, then I won't eat." Jinwan's tone remained mild, her eyes never leaving the phone. "In any case, I was just casually saying it. It's already so late. It's indeed not good to make such a fuss. The phone was currently playing a new movie by a famous director. The opening scene was a fight scene. After watching for a while, Jin-won felt that it was a little messy and switched to another movie. The man's voice rang by her side again. Do you really want to eat my cooking? She did not even raise her eyelids. I don't have much of an appetite. The takeout noodles are too oily. No matter how good the taste is, I'm not used to it. The man did not speak anymore, but Jin-won could feel that the man had directly lifted the covers and gotten off the bed. She watched as the bed returned to being the only one there. Her gaze finally shifted toward the man's back. She saw that he was going to change his clothes. Was he really going to cook noodles for her? In fact, she was just looking for a reason to not want him to sleep on her bed. But she was indeed a little hungry. It was impossible for Mo Jingshin not to see that she was purposely making things difficult for him and sending him away. However, as she watched the man change into his shirt and trousers, Jin-won quickly withdrew her gaze and lowered her head to watch the movie on her phone. Her heart, however, was suspicious. This hotel was not as big as Shengtang Hotel, nor was it a hotel invested by Shine Group. It shouldn't be that easy to make them vacate the kitchen for him. However, the man did not take long to leave. The silence in the room formed a sharp contrast with the sound of the movie on her phone. Jin-won suddenly felt like a childish child. Her way of venting was also very childish, but she could not control herself. She guessed that Mo Jingshin wouldn't be back for a while. She put down her phone, got out of bed, and searched for some skin cream in her suitcase. She then carefully applied the cream to the skin exposed by her nightgown, and rubbed the ambiguous red and purple marks a few more times. She hoped that these marks could be removed as soon as possible. Otherwise, she couldn't wear long sleeves, long pants, and high-collared clothes at the beginning of autumn. Besides, High City wasn't as hot as Jing City, and it was still a little hot. It was impossible for her to not see anyone when she went back home. After rubbing for a long time until her skin turned red, she frowned and got up to go back to bed. Now her skin was really hard to leave marks with the slightest force. No wonder the man had been ravaging her body like a demon last night. Jin-won went back to bed with a dark face, lifted the quilt, and lay down. She didn't care whether Mo Jingshin went out to buy or cook noodles for her. She just picked up her cell phone and continued to watch the movie, so that she wouldn't be distracted by other things. All of a sudden, her phone vibrated in her hand. Jin-won paused, turned off the movie, and opened WeChat to see Mo Jingshin asking her, "What flavor do you want to eat?" Jin-won replied, "Do you have seafood ingredients? Seafood noodles are also good." Anyway, the longer it was cooked, the better. The man sent a voice message. His voice was low, soothing, and patient. "Your fever has just subsided. Don't eat seafood. Change to something else." Chapter 600. After that, there was no response. Jin-won glanced at Mo Jingshin's profile picture and name again. Was he going to use her photo as his profile picture all the time? In fact, this photo was quite good. Although she was in the photo, it was not a vulgar selfie. Instead, it seemed to be a picture of the scenery outside the car. But the person sitting in the car was in it. At that time, Jin-won was talking to him, so her expression was natural. When she spoke, she did not put on an angry face, and there was even a slight smile at the corner of her eyes. To be honest, it was quite natural and beautiful. After looking at it for a long time, she suddenly realized that she had become narcissistic when looking at Mo Jingshin's profile picture. She immediately exited WeChat and continued to watch the movie with a straight face. Before she finished watching half of the movie, Mo Jingshin had returned. When he came back, Jin-won turned to see that the man was holding a bowl of steaming noodles in his hand, and it was a very big bowl. As if afraid that she would find fault with him and say that it was not enough, he cooked enough noodles for almost 2 people. Mo Jingshin put the noodles on the table and picked up another smaller bowl. He put the chopsticks aside, picked up some noodles, and put them into the smaller bowl. Then he turned to look at Jin-won, who was still sitting on the bed. "Didn't you say you wanted to eat noodles because you were hungry? Come here." Jin-won still sat on the bed and said indifferently, I don't have the strength to get out of bed to eat. The man glanced at her. When Jinwan met his eyes, she suddenly realized that he would carry her over again. When she was considering whether she should go over herself, the man picked up the bowl and chopsticks and came over. He sat on the bed and patiently picked up the noodles and fed them to her mouth. Eat. Jinwan glanced at him and pursed her lips without opening her mouth. The man raised his elegant and deep brows. What? You asked me to cook noodles for you in the middle of the night. Now the noodles are cooked and fed to your mouth. Why don't you eat them? Do you want me to feed you mouth to mouth? Jinwan looked at the noodles in his hand. How did you get them to empty the kitchen for you? The man's expression did not change. He patiently put the noodles back into the bowl and dipped them in the soup to maintain the texture of the noodles. Money makes the devil turn the millstone. It's just a kitchen. Jinwan did not speak. Alright, this was indeed the most direct method. She pursed her lips, seeing that he had already brought the noodles to her mouth and had raised it for a long time. She finally opened her mouth and ate the noodles. It was delicious. Even very. After taking a bite, she slowly chewed in her mouth. She could obviously swallow it directly, but she didn't swallow for a long time. Her slow appearance made the man raise his eyebrows. What's wrong? Did it not taste good? Against her conscience, Jinwan replied, It's really not that good. The man snorted, ignoring her words, and fed her another mouthful. You have to eat whether it's delicious or not. Otherwise, you'll be hungry until tomorrow morning. I said earlier, I want to eat seafood noodles, Jinwan said vaguely as she opened her mouth to eat the noodles. First, you can't eat seafood right now. You have to be sure that you won't have a fever tomorrow. You have to avoid food when you're sick. Secondly, how fresh do you think the seafood in the kitchen can be at this time? The freshest ones have been stored for at least 24 hours. The man looked indifferent. If you want to eat seafood, find an island to eat in a few days. There's no hurry. Who wanted to go to the island with him? Jinwan lowered her head to eat, ignoring him. Actually, it was really delicious. How could Mo Jingshan not understand this little woman's duplicity? It was only because he had bullied her harshly in bed last night that she was already stubborn. Right now, she was even more stubborn and refused to give in easily. After all, he had bullied her to this extent. It was not wrong for her to be ordered around. If it's not enough, there's more, the man reminded. Jinwan's movements of swallowing the noodles suddenly paused. Earlier, she clearly said that it didn't taste good. Yet right now she was eating happily. Every time he fed her a mouthful, she would eat it. With a few slurps, she finished half of the small bowl. She abruptly turned her face away. I'm not eating anymore. Aren't you hungry? How many mouthfuls have you eaten? I'm not eating anymore. Don't mess around. Finish the meal. It's rare for you to have an appetite. Eat more. Jinwan shrunk back into the bed, covering her legs with the blanket. She picked up her phone, intending to continue watching. Mo Jingshan watched her for several seconds before placing down the bowl in his hand. He did not use much force, but his voice carried a hint of coldness. Jinwan. He watched her calmly calling her name. I know you have a temper right now. Last night, I didn't restrain myself, but I'm afraid I'm not the only reason for everything that happened last night. You were so drunk and ran into the rain. Your words and actions are unable to make me treat you objectively and rationally. Right now, I can give in and spoil you. But if you say you want to eat, I'll cook for you. Sure, I'll cook this noodles. No matter if it's delicious or not, you have to finish it for me. Don't make things difficult for your own stomach. Seeing that she was still staring at her phone, the man raised his hand and pinched her chin. However, he softened his voice slightly. Do you really plan on letting me feed you mouth to mouth? Before Jinwan could speak, the man lowered his eyes to watch her. Your temper right now is really no different from before. Stubborn and hard. She was silent for a moment before glancing at him. Back then, didn't you tell me to stop wearing the mask of gentleness and understanding? I'm still the same as before. It's easy to change mountains and rivers, but it's hard to change a person's nature. You're right. I'm still the same. The Jinwan mask that I used to think over and over again in order to keep my marriage, and you is gone. I'm me. Anyway, There's nothing to hide between us. You said I was pretending in front of you because I didn't want to divorce you, but now I'm living like I was in the past. You said I have a bad temper. Mo Jingshan. Do you think I'm a clay figurine that you can make round and flatten? If you want me to be round and square, if you want me to be round? She said so much, but the man only chuckled lightly. He picked up the bowl again. Right now you're not just having a bad temper. You're also using the words I once said to stab me. If I really wanted to hurt you, I'm afraid you could hold a knife to my neck and scream to kill me at any time. Jinwan glanced at him. She wouldn't scream to kill him. But if it weren't for this matter, if it weren't for the fact that he was doing this for her sake, she would definitely keep her distance from him and would never come to Jing City with him for the rest of her life. If worse came to worst, she would scram back to London. At most, they would never meet again. Chapter 601. After all, if she hid too far away, it would be hard for him to make a move. The man brought the noodles to her mouth again. Jinwan didn't eat. In fact, she really wasn't full, but she didn't want to see him so proud. This time, Mo Jingshan stretched out his arm to pull her out of the quilt, let her sit on his lap, and fed her again. If you don't eat, it'll get cold. It's fine if you torture me in the middle of the night, but do you really plan to starve until tomorrow morning? A woman's body was soft, and the temperature in the room was very comfortable. She was only wearing a negligee, which was very thin. If she sat on his lap, her body would rub against his. Jinwan originally wanted to get down from his arms, but after moving a few times, she clearly felt the man's reaction. She was shocked and couldn't believe it. Last night, this man pressed her so violently on the bed and in the bathroom for so long, but now he still had a reaction when he touched her. Glancing at her indescribable expression, Mo Jingshan calmly handed the bowl to her. Although the change in his lower body was very obvious, his handsome face was still calm and indifferent, but his voice was much lower and hoarse, revealing his patience. He stared at her. You continue to torture me until we don't have to sleep anymore. If you don't plan to eat this noodles, I don't mind cooking another bowl for you after I'm full. She wanted to eat noodles, but he said he wanted to eat, of course. It couldn't be this bowl of noodles. Jinwan's face alternated between red and white. Of course she was not threatened but angered. She abruptly raised her hand to take the noodles. As she picked up the noodles, she said coldly, Mo Jingshan, it seems that your life as an ascetic monk is really unpleasant. Haven't you always been very self-controlled? Why is it that your brain is full of these things like a worm? When you were in America, and Shuyan wasn't married yet, you have a lot of women around you. When you're really hard, why don't you find a woman to solve your physiological problems? Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at her. His thin lips curved into a faint smile. Seeing that the man didn't speak, Jinwan turned to look at him as she ate the noodles and glared at him. Has there really been a woman who wanted to climb into your bed? Her sarcastic words were on the tip of her tongue, but she saw him slightly nod. Do you think it's too little? Jinwan did not speak and lowered her head to eat the noodles. She found that there was a poached egg below and took a bite. The man's tone didn't change as he continued. But it's true that no one else has succeeded except for you. Jinwan's expression was cold. Do I need to crawl? Didn't I sleep with them legally before? Mo Jingshan chuckled lightly, his lips curving slightly. His voice was slightly lazy and heavy. It's legal. I'm used to sleeping with you. In front of me, other women are just pink skeletons. Just looking at them makes me lose my appetite. I don't feel anything, so they can't climb up. Jinwan quickly lowered her head to glance at the man's lower body that was clearly poking at her. She said with a straight face, Can you stop looking at me? Either hurry up and get down, or let me sit back on the bed. He kept pestering her like this, and even talked about climbing into bed. She didn't even feel comfortable eating noodles. Mo Jingshan looked at her awkward expression and smiled mildly. I'm afraid I won't be able to get down myself. Jinwan fiercely swallowed the remaining half of the egg. She abruptly turned around and almost bumped into the man's face. He leaned close to her, his breath landing on her ears. His voice seemed to carry an illusion of bewitchment. You'll help me? She directly stuffed the empty bowl into his hands. Get another bowl. Mo Jingshan raised his brows slightly. His gaze landed on her stiff face, and he did not speak. Jin Wan felt that his gaze on her was filled with ill intentions. Her voice immediately became sharp. Mo Jingshan, don't even think about it. The man looked at her in amusement. Don't even think about it? What did I say? Jin Wan. I want to eat noodles. She turned her face away, wanting to get down from his body, but did not dare to move. Mo Jingshan held her waist with one hand. Seeing that she really wanted to eat more, he finally released her and went to the table to get another bowl for her. After Jin Wan's fever subsided, it did not rise again. That night, although Mo Jingshan did not do anything to her, it was already very late after eating noodles. Jin Wan had no reason to drive him back to Shengtang Hotel, so the man still stayed in her room and climbed onto her bed. Although nothing happened all night, and Jin Wan placed a pillow in the middle of the bed, when she fell asleep, the man pulled her into his arms. In the morning, she opened her eyes in a daze and saw the man's face so close to hers. At first, Jin Wan thought it was a dream. When she woke up, the sky was already bright. She abruptly sat up on the bed, but the man beside her had already disappeared. She raised her hand and rubbed her head. It didn't hurt as much as it did yesterday, and her condition was much better. She took her phone and looked at the time. It was almost noon. There was a WeChat voice message on her phone. It was from Mo Jingshan. She found that since she gave him a WeChat account, the man was very diligent in using it. He said that he had an important meeting in Jing City this morning and asked her to rest in the hotel. He would be back in the afternoon. After Jin Wan woke up, she received several calls, most of which were from the company. In fact, she had finished a lot of work in Jing City, and she had met all the people she needed to meet. However, just after she received a call from a business partner who invited her to meet them in the afternoon. There were some things that she had planned to talk about after returning to High City. Jin Wan felt much better now, so she got up, cleaned up, washed, and changed clothes. When she took a shower, she saw that the marks on her body were still there. They looked very red yesterday, but today they were a little bruised. It would take at least several days for the marks to disappear. She stood in front of the mirror with a cold face and put on long-sleeved clothes. At the same time, she took a long time to deal with the marks on her neck with concealer. When she arrived at the appointed place, she learned that this Western restaurant was invested by the Rong family's catering company in Jing City. As soon as she heard that it was the Rong family's restaurant, Jin Wan looked at the business partner, who had been waiting inside for a long time, and suddenly felt that today's invitation was not so ordinary. It might be a trap. But since she had come, and the business partner had seen her get out of the car, and was waiting inside, she had no way out. Chapter 602. Sure enough, as soon as she entered the door, she saw the business partner who had contacted her was standing next to Rong Chung with a big smile on his face. She didn't know what they were talking about. Rong Chung, whom they had only met once or twice last time, and didn't have a good impression of, stood there indifferently and looked directly at Jin Wan. As soon as she saw this person, Jin Wan thought of Rong Yen. She looked at the partner who had asked her to come and said with a smile, I was wondering why Xiao Zhao would invite me to finalize the cooperation project in one go today. It turns out that there is another reason? CEO G, don't think too much. It's just that CEO Rong and I have a good relationship. Recently, CEO Rong often mentions you. I feel that CEO Rong is interested in CEO G. I just want to do you a favor and help you get together. CEO Zhao smiled, and when he looked at Jin Wan, his eyes were a little ambiguous. Jin Wan smiled and looked indifferently at Rong Chung, who was standing there like a son of a rich family. CEO Rong is interested in me? I'm afraid it's not impossible. CEO Zhao, you're joking too much. CEO Zhao didn't expect that Jin Wan, who was usually good at talking in business, would suddenly speak so directly. He paused and seemed a little embarrassed. But Rong Chung said, why not? CEO G is so beautiful and so successful at such a young age in the business world. There must be a lot of men who admire you. It's natural for me to fall in love with you. President Zhao chimed in from the side. Yes, yes, yes. President Rong is the most straightforward. If you like her, then so be it. Men and women are just like that. Once they like each other, they can get together. It's not that complicated. Jinwan. CEO Zhao, you must be a fool. Rong Cheng's eyes were so cold that they almost fell out. How could he see that he was interested in her? Jinwan just smiled and didn't speak. After all, this was a banquet at Hongmen. She would deal with it as it came. CEO Zhao, the friends I made an appointment with today are still waiting upstairs. Why don't you go and meet them first? After I finish talking with CEO Ji, I'll go upstairs to catch up with you. Rongcheng turned his eyes to CEO Zhao. CEO Zhao immediately understood. Okay, CEO Rong, CEO Ji, take your time. This restaurant was not small. At first glance, she could tell that a casual Western meal here could cost more than 10,000 yuan. Jinwan turned to see that the samples of various ingredients displayed in front of her were also flown in from abroad. As expected, they were very expensive. CEO Ji, have a seat. Now that there was no one around to disturb them, the mysterious smile on Rong Cheng's face became calm and cold. He motioned for Jinwan to sit down first, but his expression was not very polite. Jinwan didn't refuse. She sat down and said flatly, CEO Rong called me here because of CEO Zhao. It can't be as simple as having a meal. I don't have anything to talk about with people I don't know. Why don't you just tell me what you want? Don't waste our time. CEO Ji, I invite you here to have a meal with you. I, CEO Rong, as I want to talk with you. As possible. I as possible. With the Rong family's power and wealth, as well as the restaurant invested by the Rong Corporation's catering company, this should be one of the best Western restaurants in Jing City. CEO Rong is indeed very sincere in inviting me to such a place for dinner. Jinwan smiled faintly. Rongcheng called the waiter over and casually ordered a few dishes. Most of them were the most expensive dishes in the restaurant. Jinwan had seen a steak from some Western country earlier, priced at 18,000 yuan. There were also several other expensive dishes. It was not that Jinwan had never eaten before, but it was her first time seeing someone ordering so arrogantly. Finally, Rongcheng ordered a bottle of 1982 Lafite. When the waiter left with the menu, Rongcheng played with the glass on the table with one hand and looked at Jinwan, who had been sitting quietly opposite him without any emotion. Although it's a bit tricky to investigate Mo Jingshan's case, I've learned something from some friends in High City. You were married to Mo Jingshan and divorced 3 years ago, right? Jinwan raised her eyebrows. Just tell me what you know. You don't have to ask me. If it weren't confirmed, CEO Rong wouldn't have invited me here to have a meal and drink Lafite, right? Rongcheng smiled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Since CEO Ji doesn't want to talk to me for too long, I'll be frank. As far as I know, CEO Ji's relationship with the Ji family is not so clear. It seems that Ji Hongwen is not related to you by blood. After you married into the Mo family, you divorced Mo Jingshan less than a year ago. Then you stayed in London for the next 3 years, and just returned to China a few months ago. CEO Ji, I think you are very talented in the business circle. As long as you have help, no matter whether you are the daughter of the Ji family or not, as long as you get better and better in the future, no one will mention your ordinary background again. As long as MN Group thrives in China, it won't be difficult for you to find a suitable man to marry. As for Mo Jingshan, his voice became indifferent. My sister hasn't insisted on seeing him these days, but I think she is really sad about him. Since you haven't seen CEO Mo for years, I'm afraid you and CEO Mo are just lovers. After the divorce, you will be far away from each other, and I don't think you have a deep affection for each other. In this case, as long as you let go of Mo Jingshan, the Rong family can do something to MN Group. Before Rongcheng could finish his words, a figure suddenly walked down the spiral staircase of the restaurant. Since when did Boss Rong start to threaten people like this? This is not the young master of the Rong family I know. Hearing the voice of the man coming down, Jinwan was speechless. When did this bastard Xiao Li come to Beijing? Was he upstairs just now? Could it be that he was one of the people Rong Chung said were upstairs today? It was not surprising. There were only a few well-known families in China, such as the Mo family in High City, the Xiao family next door, and the Rong family in Beijing. It was not surprising that the heirs of these big families knew each other. Yes, they knew each other, but she didn't know what their relationship was. Rong Chung turned his eyes because of the voice, and so did Jin Wan, only to see Xiao Li coming downstairs with a cold smile on his face. Chapter 603. Jin Wan did not take Rong Cheng's words seriously. It was just that this Jingqing family's young master wanted to stand up for his sister. But she didn't expect Xiao Li to be here. She tilted her head and looked at the approaching man. Xiao Li took a piece of cake from a passing waiter's plate and put it in front of Jin Wan. The food in this restaurant is really good, but I'm afraid it's not to your taste. You'd better take a few bites of the cake. Seeing it was the young master of the Xiao family, the waiter didn't dare to say anything and went back to fetch more cakes. Jin Wan looked at the cake in front of her and said gently and meaningfully, I wonder why so many big shots have gathered in Beijing recently. Even CEO Xiao has come here. Xiao Li, still with one hand in his trouser pocket, stood by the table and said with a smile, even a big shot like Mo Jingshan has been blown to Jing City, which shows how wonderful Jing City has been recently and how many profitable projects there are. It's not surprising that people from all walks of life have come here. What? Only your Mo Jingshan can come here. But I can't come here to meet my friends? Jin Wan smiled and pretended to be enthusiastic. Not really. She pointed to the seat on the other side of the table. CEO Xiao, if you don't mind sitting next to me, I'll ask someone to add another chair for you. Let's eat together? You're Mo Jingshan? Rong Qing sat quietly on the other side, and his eyes fell on Xiao Li's face again. In recent years, he had never heard of the Xiao family and the Ji family, and the Xiao family and the Mo family were neighbors. They were like two kings of a land. They were two different families, but why did Xiao Li's words sound different? No need to add another chair. Xiao Li raised his handsome eyebrows and glanced at the sofa chair Jin Wan was sitting on. Isn't your seat big enough? Can't you let me sit with you? Before Jin Wan could speak, Xiao Li had sat down on the sofa on her side, as if they were very familiar with each other. Without any gap, he sat next to her, so close as if they had known each other for a long time. Seeing this, Rong Qing took a look at Xiao Li and didn't know what he meant. If the young master of the Xiao family had any romantic feelings for Jin Wan, he wouldn't have mentioned Mo Jingshan just now. Rong Chung had been in the business circle for many years and lived in Beijing, so he had a lot of contacts with the heirs of the big families in the country. However, although he didn't have much contact with Xiao Li, he at least knew that Xiao Li didn't have many women around him. It was said that Xiao Li had pursued Shirni Ange, the daughter of Shida Group, for many years but never got what he wanted. What kind of ability did this Jin Wan have? One Mo Jingshan wasn't enough, and now she even had Xiao Li to support her. After sitting down with Xiao Li, Jin Wan just glanced at him calmly, and Xiao Li also glanced at her, as if it was natural for them to sit together like this. Jin Wan didn't speak. She was not interested in the luxurious Western food that Rong Chung treated her to. Although the cake that Xiao Li gave her was also from this restaurant, it was Xiao Li's treat, and had nothing to do with Rong Chung. She picked up the small fork and took a few bites of the cake. Seeing that Jin Wan didn't intend to avoid arousing suspicion, Rong Chung couldn't tell what kind of relationship she had with Xiao Li. CEO Ji. Rong Chung looked at her and said with a meaningful smile, I didn't know that MN Group and Ling Xiao Group have many connections. What he found out about MN Group had something to do with the Ji family, the Mo family, or even London, but Ling Xiao Group didn't seem to be involved. Not really, but we've met in High City, and CEO Xiao and I have had a few simple interactions in private. CEO Rong, you don't have to be so extreme and deep. We're all friends. Isn't our relationship on the table? Jin Wan took a sip of the cream on her fork, and the smile on her lips was extremely faint. Really? But it seems that CEO Zhao's relationship with you is not just on the table. For so many years, except for Miss Sure in High City, no woman can get within 1 meter of CEO Zhao. He is famous for not being interested in women. Rongcheng said and glanced at Xiao Li with a smile. Has CEO Zhao changed recently? Xiao Li sat next to Jinwan. Except for handing her a cake, he didn't do anything, but casually glanced at Jinwan eating the cake. As soon as Rongcheng said this, Jinwan saw that Xiao Li didn't want to say more, and a waiter brought the food over. Although he didn't treat people coldly like Mo Jingshan, he didn't look at people directly, and he didn't even look at Rongcheng. Rongcheng seemed to be more restrained when he spoke to Xiao Li, and was not as arrogant and condescending as before. Xiao Li picked up the cup of Americano the waiter put in front of Jinwan, and took a sip. Jinwan turned to look at him. This is the coffee I ordered. Women should just drink cappuccino, or mocha with sugar and milk. Why would you drink Americano? Don't you think it's bitter? Xiao Li held the coffee cup, glanced at her, and snorted. Be careful. You'll have yellow teeth. Jinwan. I've been relying on Americano when I'm sleepy at work these years, and now I'm used to drinking it. Xiao Li looked at her white teeth and smiled. He still held her cup of coffee and said lightly, You should change your habits since you've come back to China. Drink less coffee and more juice or water. Sooner or later, you'll get pregnant and have a baby. You should eat healthily, and pay attention to your health. Otherwise, if you drink too much coffee and give birth to a little black coal for the Mo family, Grandfather Mo will probably die of anger. What was he talking about? Jinwan's face turned livid, and she glared at him. Xiao Li still didn't care, and drank half of her coffee. She was about to speak when she saw from the corner of her eye that Rongcheng, who was sitting opposite, didn't look very good. Obviously, it was because of Xiao Li's words. So, did Xiao Li really come to support her? Was their relationship so close that when one party was in trouble, the other would come to help? They had only met a few times, okay? Chapter 604. Xiao Li naturally sat by her side and chatted with her. Recently, there have been a lot of events in Beijing. All kinds of banquets and financial symposiums have gathered here. Many people are not qualified to come. Did Mo Jingshan bring you here? In fact, Jinwan didn't really want to mention Mo Jingshan. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and trousers, and had been sitting under the air conditioner for fear that her sweat would ruin the concealer. If that happened, the marks on her neck would be exposed. At that time, even if she wanted to say that she had nothing to do with Mo Jingshan, she might not be able to explain herself. But it was Mo Jingshan's idea that she came to Beijing. She nodded. Seeing Jinwan nod, Xiao Li raised his eyebrows and smiled, and Rongcheng's face darkened. After all, MN Group has moved back to China. It's not bad to come to Beijing occasionally. If Mo Jingshan and I don't have time, you can ask CEO Rong for help. At this time, Xiao Li turned his eyes to Rongcheng and said with a meaningful smile, President Rong is one of the most influential young men in the capital. Not to mention the Rong family in the capital, the Rong's group alone can compete with the major domestic companies. With his strength, it's easy for him to help you contact some partners in the capital, or help you gain a foothold in the capital circle. Rongcheng glanced at Xiao Li and heard Xiao Li continue. President Rong, we've been friends for many years. If my sister comes to the capital again, I'll have to rely on you. Rongcheng raised his eyebrows. Sister? Why haven't I heard that you have a sister? What? Is CEO Ji your sworn sister? Jinwan also got goosebumps when she heard the word sister. Xiao Li smiled naturally. Xiao Li's smile couldn't be more natural. Sort of. Everyone in the circle knows that CEO Rong dotes on his sister. Your second miss has been taken care of by you since she was a child. It's rare for a loner like me to have a sister I want to take care of. Jinwan is stubborn, but in fact she has a good character. My father likes her very much, and always wants to invite her home for dinner. She doesn't want to cause misunderstandings, so she rarely talks about these things. Hearing Xiao Li said his father also liked Jinwan, Rongcheng took a few more glances at Jinwan. Jinwan hadn't contacted Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan since she met him last time. She didn't ask much, and he didn't say much, but in fact, many things were self-evident. Sister? Hehe, who's his sister? Rongqing sneered and said. I didn't expect COG to have such a close relationship with the Xiao family. In this case, we don't need to be so distant anymore. In the future, Miss G, you can indeed come to Jing City more often. You are at a marriageable age, so you should let go of your old feelings. I will find more suitable men for you, so you won't feel wronged. Jinwan put down the little fork in her hand, smiled, and said in a lazy voice, CEO Rong, you've been concerned about my feelings in marriage again and again. How can I be distant? You're the boss of a listed company. Don't you think you're too idle to care about other people's affairs? Jinwan's words were not polite at all. Xiao Lui turned his head, looked at Jinwan's delicate and fair face, turned his eyes with a smile, and said lightly, Yes, CEO Rong really cares about your affairs. Is it possible that CEO Rong is going to start a marriage agency business? I advise you to stop. After all, it's an unpopular business. In this industry, people often shoot themselves in the foot. It's a thankless and unprofitable business. Don't do it. Rongqing raised his eyebrows slightly, and the smile on his lips deepened and became colder. He thought Xiao Lui just couldn't bear to see Jinwan being wronged here, so he came to join in the fun. He didn't expect that the Xiao family's elder Xiao, who had never participated in any disputes in the circle, would be so straightforward. Jinwan seemed to have a strong presence in the Xiao family, and Jinwan's family background was unknown. If he put all these together, interesting. Rongqing's lips were full of smiles. Of course I can't do that. After all, no one knows whether the girl introduced to him is first-hand or second-hand. What if she's a divorced woman, and she's married like a virgin? It's not easy to deal with her, if she comes back to settle the score with me. He picked up the tissue under the plate on the table, and wiped his hands. What's going on the second floor? Aren't there 2 tables playing cards? CEO Xiao, did you lose too much, so you came out to take a walk? But you've been out for too long. Won't your superiors be impatient? Xiao Lui raised his dark eyes slightly, looked at Rongqing who was about to eat, and gave a cold smile. He played with the coffee cup on the table with his well-defined fingers, and gently tapped it. When he turned to look at Jinwan again, his eyes reflected Jinwan's equally calm and cold figure. Jinwan was born with a face that could enchant all living things. However, over the years, her brows had long been accustomed to revealing a reserved and restrained expression. She was so cold that it seemed as though she would not be affected by anyone's attacks. She was so noble and cold that it seemed as though she was unapproachable. Even if the other party was Rongqing, she continued to eat the cake that Xiao Lui gave her, and didn't touch the various Western dishes that gradually filled the table. Seeing Jinwan's expression didn't change at all, but he was a bit displeased by Xiao Lui's words, and said those indecent words. Rongqing's eyes gradually became calm and indifferent. I don't think COG has an appetite. Since you're here, why don't we go to the second floor to play cards? In recent years, COG's business has been going smoothly. I reckon that his luck should be very smooth. If he goes to the poker table, he will probably be able to win millions of dollars in a few minutes. With that, Rongqing got up and asked the waiter to go upstairs to inform those people that a friend downstairs wanted to join them. Jinwan drank the juice and ate the cake. Her gaze followed Rongqing's back. Seeing that he had gone upstairs first, she pursed her red lips into a cold smile and said unhurriedly, CEO Xiao, can I refuse this game of cards? Xiao Lui glanced at her. You're really good at making trouble. How could you provoke someone like Rongqing? That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.